My breakfast that morning was a bowl of porridge so thin I could see my own reflection in it, and my reflection looked hungry. That was the first hint the day was going to be great. Let me set the scene. I woke up on a boat. Not a nice boat. Two rotting fishing boats lashed together with hemp rope and prayers, the seams stuffed with mud and rags, riding low in the muck of a place everyone called Dumb Bay. This was my home now. This was my whole life now. Because a couple of weeks earlier I had died in one world and opened my eyes in this one, inside the body of a poor fisherman's kid, and the universe had not left a welcome basket. The kid I had become was named Lai Y. His father had been dragged off to dig a canal for the government a year ago and never came back. His mother wove fishing nets by lamplight until her eyes gave out. And this whole rotten little bay was owned, body and soul, by a gang. The father is the part that stuck in me because I got his memories along with his body, and I want you to hear how this world works before we go any further. Lai Kang was an honest man. That was his whole crime. When the government came through conscripting bodies to dig a canal, the quota fell on the family, and it should have been the lazy uncle, the favored son who never worked a day. But the family had money to grease the right palms for the favorite and none to spare for the honest one, so they put the honest one's name on the list instead. Lai Kang didn't fight it. He shouldered his pack on a snowy night with his little son crying and his brother sobbing crocodile tears into their grandfather's lap, and he walked off to a canal where they say the bones of the workers could build a second city wall, and he never sent word again. That's the founding fact of this life, and I turned it over in my head a lot those first weeks. A good man gets sent to die so a worthless one can stay warm, and everybody just agrees, because that's the shape of the world. Honest is a thing they spend, and clever is a thing they keep. I decided very early that I was going to be extremely clever, but I never once forgot which one my father was. Keep him in the back of your mind. We come all the way back around to him at the very end, and I promise you the trip is worth it. The Golden River Gang. They ran a beautiful little racket called the Dragon King's Incense Offering. Sounds holy. It was not holy. Every month their men walked the river with tin lanterns painted with one blood-red character, knocking on doors, collecting money that fishermen did not have. Pay up, and you got a little blue fish scale to nail over your door. Proof of the Dragon King's protection. Miss a payment, and one night somebody quietly drilled a hole in the bottom of your boat. Next morning a little lantern floated on the river where your boat used to be. And sometimes something floated under it. So that was the neighborhood, real up and coming. I remember sitting in the marsh that first week with the other kids from the bay, all of us stranded on a wrecked ship like a very sad support group. There was Wen Tao, the richest of us, which meant his family owned an extra pair of shoes. There was Ding Fan, whose sick father coughed all night. Yuan Bo, who was about to sell 10 years of his life to a pawn shop. Mei Lin headed off to scrub floors for a rich man. Everybody had a plan to survive by getting a little smaller, a little quieter, a little more owned. Then Wen Tao looked at me and asked what my plan was. And I said out loud, like a lunatic, I'm going to learn martial arts. The silence that followed was the kind you could hang laundry on, when Tao actually laughed and waved his hand. Ah, why, you're talking nonsense again? I get it. In this world there's a saying. The poor become scholars, the rich become warriors. Learning to fight cost 10 taels just to walk in the door, then 2 more a month for food. 1 for medicine baths, and a bottomless river of meat to feed your body. A fisherman's kid picking up martial arts was about as realistic as a fish deciding to become an accountant. But here's the thing they didn't know. Here's my little secret. When I opened my eyes in this body, I found something already waiting inside my head. A line of golden words hanging there like a fortune cookie left by a god with a sense of humor. Destiny, heaven rewards diligence, certain success is assured. I want you to really sit with that. In this world, learning any skill had a talent ceiling and a wall called a bottleneck, and most people cracked their skulls against it for years and got nowhere. For me, there was no ceiling, no wall. Whatever I practiced, if I practiced it enough, I would succeed, guaranteed. Written in gold. The universe had dropped me into the worst possible life and then handed me a cheat code, which is either mercy or a very dark joke, and honestly, I've stopped trying to tell the difference. There was only one catch. I poked at that destiny for days, and it only lit up for one thing. Martial arts, fists, so learning to fight wasn't a dream, it was the door, and I was going to walk through it whether the world liked it or not. I just had to survive long enough to afford the doorknob. That afternoon, I got a preview of exactly what I was up against. I was almost home when I heard the screaming. My neighbor, Uncle Zhao, was pinned face down in the mud by two of the Golden River Gang's men, blood at the corner of his mouth, his eyes full of that specific hopelessness you only see on people who know no one is coming. His crime? He'd fished a little too far upstream. Off the leash, his wife knelt in the wreckage of their home sobbing into her hands, and their pots lay smashed in the dirt. And standing over all of it, sighing like he was the real victim here, was a man named Jin Hai. Picture a barrel that learned to smile, stocky silk jacket hanging open to show off a knife scar on his chest like it was a medal. Jin Hai collected the Dragon King's money in Dumb Bay, and he had turned squeezing the poor into a genuine art form. He charged the grieving for funerals. Charged brides' families a fee so the water ghost wouldn't come for them. Everybody in the bay knew exactly what the water ghost was. It was him. He spotted me and lit up like we were old friends. "Ah, why, look at this mess old Zhao made for himself." He gestured at the beaten man like it broke his heart. "Upstream is gang territory. Rules are rules. Nothing I can do." Then he draped a heavy arm around my shoulder and got to the point because there was always a point. "How's your family's money lately? It hurts me to see you and your mother struggle. I could lend you a little. 100 coins, only 2 coins interest a day. Very fair. Just put up your boat as collateral." Let me translate that generous offer. 2 coins a day on 100 sounds tiny, until you do the math and realize it's the kind of interest rate that eats a family alive and calls it dinner. And the collateral was the boat, our home. Our only way to eat. He wasn't offering a loan, he was pricing our funeral. I put on my very best grateful idiot smile and thanked him and said we were managing just fine. His smile froze for half a second, like a door quietly deciding to lock. "Sure," he said, "come find me anytime." And then real slow, real gentle, "Go home, don't keep your mother waiting." It was the softest threat I'd ever heard, and it taught me more about this world in 10 seconds than a month of watching had. Jin Hai never raised his voice. He didn't have to. He'd figured out the most profitable thing a strong man can be in a place full of weak ones, which is patient. He didn't rob you at knife point. That's crude, that draws attention. He offered you a loan at an interest rate that would take your boat in a season, and he smiled while he did it, and he sighed about how hard times were, and he waited for the water to close over your head on its own. A knife is for amateurs. The real predators of this world use paperwork and pity and time, and they call it business, and everyone bows and says, "Thank you, master," on their way to the bottom of the river. I filed his face away somewhere cold and permanent, and I went home. I want you to remember that I filed it away because I filed a lot of faces away in those first weeks. The smiling barrel, the cold grandfather, the scheming aunt, and I want you to understand something about that little cabinet in my head. It is not a place where grudges go to sulk. It's a place where debts go to wait. I am very, very patient about my debts. I learned it from watching Jin Hai. He'd have been proud right up until the night I paid him back in full. Home was my mother, Mother Zhu. A small, tired woman with a shuttle in her hands from dawn to dark, weaving nets she could barely sell, feeding us on rice bran that scraped your throat on the way down. That night she looked at the almost empty rice bag and told me we might have to start chewing the bran plain, and maybe the Dragon King would take pity and toss us a scrap. The Dragon King's scrap, by the way, was a cold offering bun that sank into the river after a ceremony and got fished out days later, bloated. That was the pity on offer here. I decided the Dragon King and I were not going to be friends. She wanted me to learn a trade. Something safe, something that got me off the water and made me small enough to survive. She'd even heard of a carpenter taking apprentices, and I understood her. I really did. In a world like this, a trade wasn't a dream, it was a life raft, and she'd been drowning long enough to grab any raft she could reach. But I'd already seen where safe and small and quiet got you. It got you face down in the mud with a smiling barrel standing on your back. I didn't want a raft, I wanted a knife. So I told her the truth. "Mother, I want to learn martial arts." She looked at me the way you look at a boy who says he's going to walk to the moon. Not angry, just heartbroken that he doesn't know yet that he can't. That's when someone knocked on the hull. It was my cousin, Lin Manhua. She was maybe the one genuinely good thing this life had handed the kid before I moved in. She worked herself half to death at a cloth shop, and she showed up at our boat in the cold with her old dress plastered to her by the river wind. and she pressed a little bundle of mixed grain and beans into my mother's hands and refused to take it back. Then she pulled me aside, and she took a small faded red purse out of her coat, and she put it in my hand. I opened it later, 5 taels of silver and a fistful of coins. 2 years of savings, her dowry, the money that was supposed to buy her a future, and she just handed it to me so I could buy mine. "Cousin, I can't take this," I said, and I meant it. She just blinked at me and did this little pretend annoyed thing. "What, afraid you won't learn well enough to pay me back? I'll charge you interest then." I looked at the calluses on her fingers and the cracks in her knuckles from pounding cloth in freezing water, and I promised her, dead serious, that I would pay it all back with interest. And she laughed and told me she was only joking about the interest. I was not joking. I have never in my life been less joking. Here is a thing I learned fast in this world. Kindness is the rarest currency there is, and the people who have the least of everything else somehow keep spending it anyway. My cousin had nothing, and she just handed me everything. I wrapped my fingers around that purse, and the little bit of warmth her hand had left on it, and I made myself a very quiet, very serious promise about what I was going to build with it. That silver, sitting in my palm in the moonlight, was brighter than any moon I'd ever seen. So now I had my ticket. What I needed was a door to spend it on. The door came with a middle man attached. Broker Wang a wiry guy who smoked a pipe the size of his arm and had a reputation for being honest, which in Dumb Bay made him basically a folk hero. You needed a broker to vouch for you because no teacher took a student without knowing his family was clean. Turns out being a starving orphan is great for one thing. Nobody worries you've got skeletons. You can barely afford the closet. Wang looked me up and down, all the way down to my faded rags, and gave me the honest man's honest speech. "Kid, martial arts aren't like learning a trade. You wash out, the money's gone forever." I told him I'd thought it through. He thought for a minute, and then he took me to a place on Changping Street, to a retired old bodyguard named Zhu Lei. Zhu Lei. 50s, black robe, little goatee, a rat and cane he used more for pointing than walking. He ran a 2-courtyard place where shirtless young men beat themselves half to death on wooden stakes under the sun. He looked at me, pinched my shoulder with a hand that felt like iron filings, decided my bones hadn't finished setting yet, and grilled me about my family until he was satisfied I wasn't going to get him killed. Then he named his price, took my cousin's silver, 3 months of tuition gone in one breath, and just like that I was a student. He also made one thing crystal clear right away. He taught for money. Miss a payment, get thrown out. No hard feelings, no charity. In this world, even the good options had teeth. My third senior brother, a big honest slab of a guy named Fang Qiang, showed me the ropes. The rules were simple. Don't tell outsiders your school's name until you graduate. Don't start fights. And a fun one, don't draw your weapon or announce yourself unless you're there for revenge or to burn down somebody's front gate. I made a note. Good to know which activities were on the approved list. Then Zhu Lei started my education, and my education started with standing still. He called it the Tongbai stance, ape arms reaching for the sky. He hopped up onto a wooden stake, this thin old man suddenly moving like a monkey, and folded himself into a pose that looked like a stork having a stroke. Head suspended, tailbone straight, sitting on an invisible stool. Looked easy, looked almost lazy. I climbed up, copied it, and my whole body immediately declared war on itself. Every muscle I owned was twisting against every other muscle, ropes fighting ropes. 3 breaths in, I fell off and scraped my elbow bloody on the brick. Cool, very cool. Turns out standing was the hard part. Zhu Lei explained the road ahead like a man reading me my sentence. Martial arts had 2 halves. You accumulate, then you break through. You nourish your blood by standing there suffering, and when your blood hits its peak, you attempt to smash through a barrier into the next realm. Bright force. Then, if you survive that, hidden force. Then transformation force. 3 walls, 3 chances to level up. And here was the part that would have killed a normal man's dreams. The success rate for that first breakthrough. For ordinary people, 20, maybe 30%. 1 in 4, and if you failed, you lost most of what you'd built, and it usually never came back. Everyone else heard those numbers and felt their stomach drop. I heard them and almost laughed, because up in the corner of my vision, my little golden fortune cookie was still glowing. Certain success is assured. 20% for them, 100 for me. I just had to grind hard enough to get there. So I gritted my teeth, climbed back on the stake, and I stood. My legs shook like leaves. My lungs felt like someone was ironing them, and after half an hour of that beautiful agony, the gold flickered. Tongbai stance, beginner, 1 out of 1,000. There it was, a counter. Every rep the world doled out to other men as a gamble, my destiny just quietly banked as progress. 1 down, 999 to go, so I did it again. And again, while the other students chatted and rested in the shade, I stood on my stake like the world's saddest scarecrow, feeding that counter one miserable number at a time. 10 a day, that was my rate. Everyone thought I was showing off for the teacher. Nobody realized I was the only person in that yard who knew, with absolute certainty, that the effort would pay. That is a very strange kind of loneliness, being the only one in the room holding a winning ticket while everyone tells you the lottery's rigged. The yard taught me other things too, like the exact shape of the gap between the poor students and the rich ones, and it was a gap you could measure at lunch. The poor kids gnawed frozen cornbread with cold, pickled scraps, each bite a small battle. The well-off ones unwrapped oil paper to find warm white cakes and braised meat with the fat still glistening, and the smell drifted across the yard and quietly tormented everyone with an empty stomach, which was all of us. That first day I had nothing to eat, and Fang Qiang, the big honest one, walked over and just handed me 2 warm steamed buns like it was nothing. Said the teacher didn't want anyone training hungry. I inhaled both of them in about 4 bites and felt human again. I want you to remember Fang Qiang was kind to me when I was nobody and had nothing, because a lot of people in this story were kind to me only after I became somebody, and there's a difference, and I kept count. There was one other student I clocked early, a dark, thin, quiet kid named Zhao Ming. Poor like me, only had an older sister and burning to pass the great martial exam so she'd never have to suffer again. Decent motivation. I actually liked him at first, but Zhao Ming had something I didn't, real talent. The teacher's eyes lit up when he watched him. He got free tuition, private lessons, extra tutoring. He hit the doorway of bright force in under a month, while the rest of us were still befriending our wooden stakes. The day the teacher pulled Zhao Ming out of latrine duty to give him special attention, I watched the other poor kids go quiet and stare at their worn-out shoes, and I felt the temperature of that yard for exactly what it was. There were 2 classes here, the ones being cultivated and the ones being sifted, and as far as everyone could see, I was sand, which was fine. Sand is easy to overlook. Being overlooked, it turns out, is a superpower if you're patient, and I had a golden guarantee and nothing but time. A month bled by. My shoulders got wider. My counter climbed, and the whole time back home, my mother wove nets until midnight to scrape together next season's tuition, and I chewed my rice bran, and I stood on my stake, and I waited for the day the sifted grain of sand turned out to be something the sifters really should have kept. The barrel came back before I was ready for him. Jin Hai kicked open our hatch one night with 2 thugs behind him and a grin full of black teeth. He said he had good news. The good news was a slab of rotting pork his men dropped on our deck, meat off a dead pig that had been soaking for days, gray-blue and crawling, and the smell walked into that little cabin and sat down. This, he explained, was meat bestowed by the Dragon King, which is a very holy name for forcing a starving widow to buy poison at premium. He patted my shoulder hard and told me I was a smart boy, and smart boys don't make foolish mistakes. 3 days pay for the rotten meat or else. My mother's hands were shaking. And I stood there playing the terrified fisherman's kid, and I did the only thing I've ever really been good at. I thought, because something was off. Jin Hai was in a hurry, and he only came at night now, never in daylight. A man that comfortable, that untouchable, doesn't suddenly work the night shift. I'd been hearing the whispers on the docks. A new outfit called the Tiger Gang was chewing into Golden River territory. The Golden River Gang was losing, and Jin Hai wasn't collecting anymore. He was looting, grabbing everything that wasn't nailed down, wringing every last coin out of Dumb Bay so he could run before his own gang collapsed under him. A rat cleaning out the pantry before he abandons the ship. That was a rat with his back turned, and a rat with his back turned is not a threat, he's an opportunity. I told my mother to leave it to me. 2 nights later, I watched him. He sat on a boat in the dark, counting his stolen silver on a greasy rag with his 2 goons, bragging about which families he'd bleed dry tomorrow before he vanished for good. And when they split up and Jin Hai waddled off toward one of his little hidey holes, alone down a black alley so narrow it only fit 1 man, I was already there, waiting, in the dark, being nobody. I'd soaked a length of hemp rope in tung oil. I'd been standing on a wooden stake for a month building the exact muscles a person needs for this. And when he passed, I looped that rope around his neck and I braced my back against the cold brick wall and I pushed off with both legs and put every rep of that miserable stance into it. He fought. Of course he fought. His whole body screamed to live, the same way Uncle Zhao's had screamed under his men's boots, the same way this whole bay had been screaming for years while he smiled over the top of it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held on. My palms tore open on the rope and I held on until it was over, and then I made sure it was really over, the thorough way, because half a job in this world is a job that comes back to kill you. Then I searched him, took back a fraction of what he'd stolen from everyone, 4 or 5 tails and a jade bracelet, and I walked out the other end of the alley and I was gone. I stood on the empty street after and looked at my shaking hands. I'd expected to feel sick. I'd expected to throw up or shake apart or hear my old life screaming at me from somewhere. And instead there was just this flat, cold quiet, because I'd already done the math on this world. When it comes to killing, there's really only 2 numbers you can be, 0 or a lot, and I had just left 0 behind for good. You are what you eat, they say. Turns out you don't rise in a place like this by swallowing suffering. You rise by swallowing the people who feed it to you. I decided I could live with that. Actually, I decided I intended to live, period, and in Dumb Bay those 2 decisions were the same decision. The next morning the docks were buzzing. Master Jin was dead, killed in the dark by some enemy, and half the bay was secretly throwing a party in their own hearts. My mother told me the news like it was a warning, be careful, why, the gang's hunting the killer. I nodded and looked appropriately worried. The killer, meanwhile, ate his rice bran and went to go stand on a stake. Because that same day, Zhu Lei decided it was time to show us what martial arts were actually for. He'd been teaching us pretty forms. That morning he stopped pretending. He called Fang Qiang out to demonstrate, and then this thin old retired bodyguard turned into something else entirely. His arm shot out with no bones in it, 5 fingers snapping together like a bird's beak, and tapped a point below Fang Qiang's ear so fast it was just a blur and a crisp little snap. Fang Qiang, a grown man braced and ready, flinched and turned his head and left his whole body open. Light touch, Dizzy, Zhu Lei said. Heavy touch, dead. Then he did it again on the other side, a claw sliding up the inside of the arm to hook the throat and stopped a hair from the skin. He wasn't out of breath. To him, these were the boring basics. The whole yard went dead silent. We'd all been practicing pretty punches with proper form. None of us had ever seen the teacher just casually show us the murder living inside them. Every move aimed at the softest, most fragile piece of a person. Not to win. To end, real martial arts, he told us, are killing techniques. The pretty stuff is for fooling country folk into clapping. When you actually fight, you forget the rules and you remember exactly one thing. Fastest, meanest, most efficient way to break the man in front of you. That's it. That's the whole art. And standing there, palms still raw under my sleeves from a rope 2 nights before, I felt this cold thing click into place in my chest because he was describing something I had just done. I hadn't learned it from him. I'd learned it from the alley. But now I had a name for it and a teacher to sharpen it and a golden counter to guarantee I mastered it. That was the day I started actually sparring, learning the fighting form from Fang Qiang, and a new counter lit up next to the first. Tongbei Fist, beginner, 1 out of 500. 2 guarantees now, both ticking upward. Oh, and that same day I met the teacher's daughter. They called her junior sister Zhu. Zhu Yu. She'd just come back from studying medicine, and she drifted through that yard of sweaty men in a plain white dress dabbing ointment on scrapes, gentle and pretty and completely out of place, like a magnolia growing out of a rock pile. And within about a week, an astonishing number of my senior brothers had developed mysterious, tragic back injuries that could only be treated by, you guessed it, the pretty medicine girl. Grown men. Faking limps for a smile. I filed her away too, but in a different drawer. Not the cold one, just noted. A kind face in a hard place is worth keeping track of. There were about to be very few of them. A few days later the yard got a visit from Money. 2 outfits showed up to shop for muscle. An escort agency and a weapon shop, both looking to hire bright force fighters as guards. And when Fang Qiang told me the pay, I nearly fell off my stake. The weapon shop offered 3,000 coins a month plus 30 katas of meat for 1 fighter. My mother wove nets from dark to dark for a whole month and made maybe 500 coins. 30 cattas of meat was a fantasy she'd never even bothered to have. That was the moment the whole ladder came into focus for me, and I want to lay it out plain because everything I did after this was just me climbing it faster than anyone thought possible. There are 3 walls. The first, bright force, tempers your blood and skin, and clearing it means you eat you're worth hiring as a guard, 3,000 coins and 30 cattas of meat a month, a fortune to a fisherman. The second, hidden force, tempers your marrow and turns you quiet and deadly, and reaching it makes you a pillar, someone a whole faction schemes to own. The third, transformation force, unites the two into one thing, and reaching that puts you in a room with maybe 24 men in the entire county, honored guests of gangs and great families, treated like living treasure. And each wall is a gamble that fails most of the men who bet everything to reach it, and above the third wall there are supposed to be more walls still, sect arts and something they call cultivating kai, roads so high my dying teacher only knew them like rumors. That was the map, and here's the joke of it, the whole engine of me. For every other man alive, that map is a mountain of dice, each throw likely to lose him everything. For me, with the gold in my skull, it was just a staircase. A long one, a painful one, but a staircase, where every step, if I took it enough times, was guaranteed to hold. Climb or stay sand, the world said to everyone. But it only really said it to them. To me, it whispered something else. Climb and you cannot fall. To show off the goods, Zhu Lei sent out Zhao Ming, and credit where it's due, the kid was good. He unloaded his Tongbei fist, and the air actually cracked with each punch. This hard, snapping boom, the sound of bright force, the sound of a man who'd broken through the first wall and left the rest of us behind. The 2 buyers started a bidding war on the spot. 30% of the profits. No, 5,000 coins and a set of fine iron weapons. Over a poor kid who'd been weaving mats a year ago. Watching that, Zhao Ming stood a little taller, and he let his eyes drift over all the senior brothers who used to look through him, and I watched something curdle in him in real time. Nothing rots a person faster than being nobody one year and being fought over the next. I know, pot calling the kettle, but I was watching for it. He wasn't. Then Fang Qiang turned to the rest of us, the sand, and gently broke the news. Reach bright force or spend your life as a servant guard, ordered around like a dog for a meal, working yourself to death by 40. The poor kids around me clenched their jaws and threw themselves back at their stakes with new fear in their eyes. Everyone in that yard was suddenly training like the ground was on fire. Not everyone made it. There was a kid named Yiping. Poor farm boy, so poor the whole village had chipped in for his tuition, and he trained harder than almost anyone, never late, never lazy. He hit his first breakthrough attempt full of hope. And he failed. And in this world, failing that first wall usually means you never touch it again, ever. He packed his bag and left overnight, quietly forever. On his way out, he said goodbye to his friend Zhao Ming. And Zhao Ming, the newly minted golden boy, didn't even look up. That was the day I understood the difference between the sand that gets sifted out and the stone that gets kept, and how thin and cruel and random the line between them was. For everyone else. For me, it was still just a counter ticking up, guaranteed. I felt guilty about that sometimes. Mostly I felt like I couldn't afford to. In the middle of all this, my old friends from Dumbay wanted a reunion. So there I was, drinking cheap tea on an old tea boat with the whole gang, and a ghost walked in. Guo Jing. She used to be one of us, a timid little fisher girl who followed Mei Lin around like a duckling, until her parents died and a rich aunt in the inner city took her away. Now she came through that curtain in silk, hair pinned with silver, spine straight as a ruler, every fold of her skirt arranged like it had been approved by a committee. 3 years and she'd crossed a border most of us would die on the wrong side of. Wen Tao couldn't stop staring. Half of us couldn't figure out where to put our hands. She was polite, she was gracious. And there was this quiet gap in the air now, the invisible wall between the person who got out and the people who didn't. When she found out I'd actually gone and started learning martial arts, she gave me this long, complicated look, like she wanted to warn me about something and couldn't find the words. Wen Tao, meanwhile, generously offered to hire me as his muscle once he became a clerk. Very kind. The tone made it clear I'd be the dog and he'd be holding the leash. I passed. Then a blue-curtained carriage came for her, an old nanny bowing and calling her young miss. And she stood at the bow of our sad little tea-boat and looked at all of us, at me a beat longer, and said, "If fate allows, let's meet again." Which is the polite, silk and silver way of saying goodbye forever. The carriage rolled off over the stones, and we all just stood there watching the dust. A bunch of kids from the mud who'd just been reminded exactly how high the wall was and exactly which side we were on. Here's the thing I understood watching that carriage shrink into the alley, and it's the whole engine of my anger, so hold it close. Guo Jing hadn't earned her silk. She'd been a timid little duckling following Mei Lin around, no smarter or better than any of us. And then her parents died and a rich aunt scooped her over the wall on a whim, and now she wore hairpins worth more than our whole bay. It wasn't merit. It was a lottery ticket, drawn at random, and it had bought her to the far side of a border the rest of us would spend our whole lives dying against. And under the polite smile, I could see she knew it, and I could see it was slowly hollowing her out, being a poor girl's ghost wearing a rich woman's clothes, owned by the aunt who'd saved her. So no, I didn't envy the carriage. I looked at that wall between the silk and the mud, the one everyone in this world treats as a law of nature, and I thought very calmly, walls are just things nobody's hit hard enough yet. I was going to hit mine until it fell, not climb over it politely with someone's hand on my collar. Break it on the way up so the mud behind me could see daylight through the hole. Before she left, though, one useful thing surfaced through the small talk. The Golden River Gang was finished, getting eaten alive by the Tiger Gang, and their boss, a man named Wu Lei, was rumored to be hiding somewhere near Locust Tree Street. Wu Lei, it turned out, was Jin Hai's brother-in-law, the head of the whole rotten snake I'd started cutting up. I picked up my cup and took another sip and let my face stay perfectly, boringly calm, but I wrote that name down somewhere cold, because a loose end like Wu Lei doesn't just sit there, it festers. And I've never once in this life waited around for a wound to rot when I could clean it out first. My cousin Silver was still buying me my life, so I went to check on the girl it came from. I found Lin Manhua at the cloth shop, sleeves shoved up, forearms red and cracked from pounding heavy cloth in freezing water, sweat on her forehead in the cold. And she saw me and lit up like I was the good part of her day, wiped her hands and dug a little bundle out of a corner. 2 warm eggs, 20 coins. A gift from the young master, she said, saved for me. She'd taken the small kindness someone threw her way and immediately handed it to me. I told her she couldn't keep giving me everything. She gave me a look and said, "Why are you being a stranger? Keep the coins," and reminded me she was charging interest, remember? Then a cruel head housekeeper came screeching about 3 bolts of cloth still needing done, and my cousin flinched and jogged back to that freezing tub, and the woman shot me a look that said trash recognizes trash and left. I stood there memorizing my cousin's cracked hands. I want you to understand something about the interest I owed her. It was never about the silver. Every coin she gave me came out of her own skin, 1 frozen bolt of cloth at a time. That's the debt I was carrying up the ladder with me. And I do pay my debts. Every last one with interest, exactly like I promised, and you're going to see me do it. Then I went back to my stake, because there was a debt-shaped number I needed to hit. The teacher, meanwhile, had quietly written me off. He checked my bones once, found them medium to low quality, gave me a few polite words of encouragement, and moved on. Merely a grain of sand sifted through is how he thought of me. He wasn't wrong about the sand. He was very wrong about the value of it, but that's the whole point of lying low. You let them believe the flattering, lazy story right up until you don't. 3 months of tuition burned down. My mother was scraping for the next round, and every day I stood on that stake feeding my counter, 10 reps, then 100, until my clothes steamed with sweat and I was the last one in the empty yard, and the number climbed and climbed and climbed toward 500. And then on an ordinary afternoon that started like every other, it happened. I was on the stake, blood roaring, and something shifted. Not an explosion, not a landslide. More like a silted-up river suddenly getting dredged clean. The world went sharp. I could see the veins in a leaf across the yard, count the dewdrops on it, hear my own heart like a drum in a quiet room. Every pore on my skin woke up at once, and a warm, thick power rose up out of my gut and spread through my whole body like the first hot thing I'd had to drink all winter. The gold flared. Tongbai stance. Minor achievement. I opened my eyes and just breathed. Because that was it. That was bright force. First wall cleared on the first real attempt, the thing that fails 3 out of 4 ordinary people and ends most of their dreams. I hadn't gambled. I'd banked it 1 rep at a time and collected exactly what the gold had promised me on day 1. And I want to be honest about the feeling because it wasn't triumph, not really. It was more like a man who has been told his whole life the stove is off finally touching it and feeling it burn. For 3 months I'd stood on that stake in pain, watching my counter tick, trusting a line of gold in my skull that no one else could see. Half afraid the whole time that the universe was setting me up for the cruelest joke of all, letting me believe right up until the wall didn't open. And then it opened. The cheat was real. The guarantee was real. Everything I'd bet on a promise from a god with a strange sense of humor had just paid out in full, in my own blood, in my own bones. I sat on that stake in the empty evening yard, the last one there as usual, and I let myself believe it all the way down for the first time. Not luck, not hope. A law, diligence for me, was a law of the universe, and I had just watched it hold. After that, there was no more fear in the climbing, only the climbing. The yard swarmed me with congratulations, some of it real, most of it the polite kind. Zhu Yu came over and pressed a packet of blood kai powder into my hand, the good stuff, the medicine that makes you cultivate faster, and I actually was touched by that one. And off to the side, a rich girl named Jiang Ziu, who liked to sniff out talent and sponsor it, watched me and decided out loud that I was just lucky, that my low talent capped me, that I'd never break the second wall. Saving face for her own bad eye since she'd passed me over. Let her underestimation is a discount, and I was shopping. I did skip one thing, though. Fang Qiang offered to help me court a rich sponsor, one of the wealthy students who invested in promising talents. I told him no. I'd take a working post and stay off everyone's books. Because the moment you take a rich family's meat, you're wearing their collar, and I had spent this whole life very deliberately not putting a collar on. Kill me before you leash me. It's a personality thing. That night I went home to tell my mother we'd cleared the first wall. She looked at my face, at the new color in it, the way bright force fills you out and puts light in your eyes, and she started crying before I even said it. And when I said it, she gripped my hands and thanked the ancestors and called her useless boy a promising man. It was the first time in either of my lives I'd made someone that happy just by existing. I'm not going to be cool about it. It got me right in the chest. She insisted I take a fish to my grandfather. Good news, she said. Maybe he'll value you more. Ah, the grandfather. Let me introduce the family, because the family is a whole thing. My grandfather ran a little store and had spent his entire life pouring everything he had, including a chunk of my dead father's rightful inheritance, into one grandson. My cousin, Lai Jun, robust, cocky, 3 months into a fancy martial arts hall, the family's designated golden child and future glory. Meanwhile, my father, the honest son, got shipped off to die on a canal, and his widow and kid got a rotting boat and a shrug. The one time my mother asked the old man to help me learn a trade, he faked a coughing fit to shut the conversation down. Real subtle. So my mother sent me trudging over there with a fish, hoping success would soften him. I got most of the way, thought about the old man's cold words and my aunt's scheming face, and I did something petty and I maintain completely justified. I hid the fish under a locust tree by their house and walked in empty-handed. Call it a test. Let's see how the welcome goes when I'm not bringing them anything. The welcome was chilly, empty hands colder. The old man had been holding a grudge that I'd learned martial arts without asking his royal permission, and he started in on the usual speech, how martial arts had no future for a boy like me, how I should follow my father, meaning, presumably, off to a canal to die. Then I mentioned I'd reached bright force. You should have seen the room change. Bright force meant a real path, real money, a possible martial scholar someday, a family with an official in it. The old man's face cracked open into joy. He stood up shaking, patted my shoulder, declared the Chen family had produced another promising man. My aunt's eyes started doing math. And then, quietly, the math finished. My aunt reminded everyone I'd taken almost 3 months to reach bright force, hinting my talent was too weak to ever break the second wall, unlike precious Lai Jun. And I watched the warmth drain right back out of the old man's face like water out of a cracked pot. Focus the resources on Lai Jun, he decided without saying it. When I left, he shook his head at my back and murmured, "What a pity." The fish stayed under the locust tree. I figured they hadn't earned it. And watching that old man's fervor cool the instant my aunt reminded him I was a poor investment taught me something I'd carry the whole way up. In this family, love wasn't love. It was capital. They didn't feel more for Lai Jun because he was kinder or better. They felt more for him because his talent promised a bigger return, a martial scholar, a tax break, a family with an official in it. They'd looked at 2 grandsons, run the numbers, and quietly written mine off as a loss to be minimized, right down to which one got fed and which one's father got sent to die. It should have hurt more than it did. Mostly it just clarified things. A family that loves you by your expected yield will drop you the day the yield looks bad and cling to you the day it looks good, and either way you were never a person to them, only a bet. So I stopped hoping to be loved by them, which is a bitter thing to give up at that age, and I felt something colder and steadier settle in its place. If I was only ever going to be a number to them, I would simply become a number too large to ignore and let them choke on the math when it turned. I was a bad bet, and honestly that suited me fine. Bad bets don't get watched. Bad bets get to become something in the dark. A few days later the Tiger Gang won. Dumb Bay had a new owner. Their boss, a smiling man named Ma Dong, actually came to my boat to introduce himself and be polite, because I was a bright force fighter now, and even a small gang leader knows to be nice to those. He was all warmth to my face. Then on his way out, I heard him quietly tell a follower to go find out exactly where I trained. Smart man, cautious. He'd clocked that I was worth watching. He was more right than he knew, and I made a note to be careful around him too. Now, bright force meant I could take a paying post, and I needed the income to keep the tuition and the meat coming. Fang Qiang laid out 3 options. Guard a rich family's warehouse, safe but a cage. Be an enforcer at a gambling house, good money, but you never knew what kind of monster would walk in. Or patrol the river for the river division. 2 taels a month, terrible pay, 6 days off, and almost nothing to do. I took the river. Obviously, I took the river. Low pay, low profile, mountains of free time to go stand on a stake. When you're trying to disappear, boring is a feature. That's how I met Yihua. He ran a squad at the River Division, a square-faced man in his 40s with a sword he wore like an old habit. He read my letter of introduction, liked that I was Zhu Lei's student, liked that I was built for work, and signed me on. Then I did something that surprised him. I asked for an advance on several months of pay for tuition. He'd never heard the request before, looked at me for a long moment, and just gave me 5 taels out of pocket and told me my salary would come to him for a while to cover it. Think about what he did, right there, with the advance. A river official has never once heard a temp fighter ask for months of pay up front. The safe answer, the normal answer, is no, that's not how it works, come back when you've earned it. Instead, he looked at a poor kid who needed tuition, reached into his own pocket, and just handed it over on a stranger's promise. Small thing. 5 taels. But small things are how you learn who a person actually is, long before the big tests come, and I was always watching the small things. I didn't know it yet, standing there, but that square-faced man was about to become one of the very few people in this world who was decent to me for no reason at all except that he was decent. Hold on to him. He matters. When the day came that his whole world was about to be torn away, I was going to remember this exact 5 taels, and I was going to pay it back with a life on the line and count myself lucky for the chance. But first I had a loose end to tie off, Wu Lei. The old boss of the Golden River Gang, Jin Hai's brother-in-law, was hiding out near Locust Tree Street while the Tiger Gang hunted him. And here's the thing about a man like me killing a man like Wu Lei head-on. It was a bad idea. He was a genuine master, deadly with a knife, and even hurt he'd have men around him. Charging in was how you ended up as a cautionary tale. So I didn't charge in. I went and watched. This is the part of me that nobody in Dumb Bay would have believed because they only ever saw the quiet fisherman. I am, before I am anything else, patient. On a stake for a year, in the shadows for a night, it's the same muscle. I lay on the rooftops of that filthy alley maze for hours in the cold, still as a roof tile, watching nothing happen, watching men come and go, reading the whole neighborhood like a page. Most people can't do that. Most people, even killers, get bored, get cold, get impatient, and move too soon, and that's when they die. But I'd spent months standing on a wooden stake doing nothing but suffering while a counter ticked, and it turns out that's excellent training for the other thing too. The waiting is the weapon, the blow at the end is just the punctuation. And it paid the way patience always pays. I spotted his men sneaking out to buy food, too much food for 2 men, which meant a boss they were hiding. I followed them home, back to a dead-end shack, and I lifted a roof tile and looked down at Wu Lei himself, holding court over his last few terrified followers. And I learned 2 things worth the whole cold night. 1. His men wanted to sue for peace and surrender to the Tiger Gang, and Wu Lei shut them down hard and let something slip, some backup plan, some man named Ah Yang, a Tiger Lord coming back to save them. I didn't know who that was. I wrote the name down in the cold drawer anyway. Turns out I should have underlined it. 2 and better, Wu Lei was wounded, medicine bottles, bloody bandages. That terrifying knife master was leaking under his robes, running on fumes and bluff. So I had a hurt, hunted man in a shack and an entire gang across town who wanted him dead. And I thought, why should I be the one to spend the blood on this? Let the people who already want him dead do the dirty work. Let somebody else hold the knife. So I wrote a note. Wu Lei's exact hiding place, plus a nice little lie framing one of his own men as the traitor who'd sold him out. Then I bounced it off the forehead of a Tiger Gang lookout in the dark and vanished before he could turn around. 20 minutes later, half the Tiger Gang was pouring into Locust Tree Street with knives out, howling for Wu Lei's head. I didn't leave, though. That was the whole trick. Because a cornered rat with a wound and a lifetime of survival instinct doesn't die easy. He fights and he runs, and a man like Wu Lei knew every crack in that maze. So while the Tiger Gang smashed in his front door and turned his shack into a battle, I waited at the back edge of it all, up on a roof, watching the one crack I'd bet he'd squeeze through. And here he came. Bleeding, half-blind, biting his own tongue to stay conscious, breaking out through the back and staggering for the river and freedom. 3 steps from making it, a shadow dropped on him out of the eaves. That was me. And even wounded, Wu Lei was leagues above a poor kid 3 months into bright force. This is the man, remember, who carved out Dumb Bay with his knife, who'd survived a lifetime of gang wars by being the meanest thing in every room he walked into. If I'd announced myself and squared up like an honorable young hero, he'd have gutted me and had breakfast. But nobody told the fisherman he had to fight honorably, and the fisherman had been paying very close attention. So I didn't fight fair. Fair is a story rich men tell to keep poor men predictable. I fought the way the alley had taught me, and the way Zhu Lei had confirmed with his own 2 hands. I hit the joints first, took his weapon arm out of the equation before he even understood I was in the world with him, and then I put everything I had into finishing it fast, because a slow fight with a knife master is a fight you lose. He got exactly 1 look at my face. 1 flicker of who are you? A nobody, a boy, where did a fishmonger learn to move like this? It's the same look Jin Hai gave the dark before him, and the same look a lot of much more important men would give me later. That little collapsing instant when a predator realizes he walked into a smaller predator's jaws. And then Wu Lei, the terror of Dumb Bay, didn't get anything else at all. I made sure it was thorough, and I made sure there wasn't a single mark on him that looked like my school's work, because the Tiger Gang was about to take the credit, and I very much wanted them to keep it. Then I searched him, and my night got a lot better. A heavy purse. Over 20 taels of silver. Last time, cutting up Jin Hai, I'd found a few taels. This was a fortune, more than my mother and I could save in years of not eating. And tucked in with it a thin book, a blade manual, the swift wind blade technique, moves and power diagrams and everything, a whole second skill just handed to me by a dead man who wouldn't be needing it. By the next morning, the whole bay knew. The Golden River boss was dead, killed by the Tiger Gang, hacked up in an alley. Exactly the story I wanted, told for free by everyone, blamed on the people who'd actually kicked in his door. For a normal person, this was a horrifying gang murder. For the Tiger Gang, it was a trophy, proof they ran the bay now. And for me, it was a purse of silver and a new manual and my name nowhere near any of it. I want to be clear that I'm not proud of the killing. I'm just extremely at peace with it. There is a difference, and I've stopped losing sleep over the gap. I brought the silver home and told my mother to start putting fish and meat on our table daily. No questions about where the money came from. She weighed the purse, and she was a woman who'd survived this world a long time, and she just nodded and started quietly planning which markets to visit so nobody would notice a widow suddenly buying meat. Some things you don't say out loud in Dumb Bay. She knew that better than anyone. The meat mattered, by the way. That was the part everyone underestimated. My blood was getting stronger, my counters climbing, but strength eats. The stronger you get, the more meat and medicine it takes to feed the next wall, and ordinary food stops being enough. Every tail I clawed back off, a dead gangster went straight into the engine. For a while, life was almost stable. I patrolled the river a couple times a day and spent every other waking hour on my stake and my forms. I'd spar the other river patrolmen, hardened men who'd been in real fights, and I learned things from them the pampered students at the school never knew. My counters climbed. Tongbai stance minor achievement, 160 out of 1,000, then more. My body filled out. I grew. One evening on patrol, Yihua showed me the inner city across the river. All those lights, all that gold, streets that were clean and safe because the rich families kept their own guards and the gangs stayed away. On our side of the water, men fought over half a bowl of rice bran. On theirs, they were bored of shark fin and trying to figure out how to feed their pigeons ginseng. That's not an exaggeration, that's just how the wealth sat in this world, one river apart, one of them stepping on the other. Yihua told me quietly that if I ever saved enough, I should get my mother even the cheapest little house on the inner city's edge. Because in a world like this, peace is the most expensive thing there is. Then a military officer rode through the docks and the whole crowd parted for him, and Yihua's voice went soft with a longing he couldn't hide. That man had passed the martial exam. Tax-free kneels to no magistrate holds a court post, and poor families lined up to serve him just to sit in his shade. That, he said, was the only real door out of the bottom. And it was, in his words, as hard as climbing to heaven. I want to give you the actual shape of that door, because it's the whole reason a martial scholar's badge is worth killing for. In this world, being born poor isn't a hardship. It's a sentence passed at birth that no amount of work overturns, because the real road's up. The schooling, the trades, the guilds are all locked behind money and clean bloodlines you don't have. There is exactly one crack in that wall for a nobody, one, and it's this exam, where they test raw strength and raw courage and, in theory, don't care who your father was. Pass it top 50 out of a field of hundreds who trained since birth, and you stop being a thing the gangs and clans can casually step on. You become a person the law itself has to bow to a little. That's not a job. It's a citizenship in a country the poor are otherwise forbidden to enter. Yihua looked at that officer the way a man dying of thirst looks at a river on the far bank. And I stood next to him and thought quietly, so that's the crack I'm going to walk through. Because it was the only door there was, and I had a key nobody else in that crowd could see. And then this decent, square-faced man, who had every reason to spend his family's money more carefully, looked at me and offered to sponsor me. 10 caddies of meat and an ounce of blood powder a month. Not much, he said, almost apologizing for it. I nearly didn't know what to do with it. Everyone else in this world wanted something from me or wanted me gone. Yihua just looked at a fatherless kid supporting his mother alone and decided to help, and later I found out he'd told his men it was just because I was about his own son's age and the world had been unfair to me. Call it fate, he said. I took the deal, and I meant every word of my thanks. Write this one down next to my cousin. The list of people who were good to me before I was worth anything was short, and I was keeping it, and I intended to pay every name on it back the same way I paid back the bad ones. Just, you know, a nicer way. Around then, the school got an invitation. A little exchange gathering with some nearby academies, real hidden force masters attending, a chance to make connections and show off. 7 spots. Fang Qiang, bless him, put my name forward. You'd have thought he'd nominated a goat. Cao Yu and Jiang Ziu, 2 of the rich students, practically choked. This represents the face of our school, they sniffed. It's not a charity event. Zhu Yu smoothed it over and offered me a spot anyway to be nice. I turned it down. Everyone read that as me being scared, stage fright. The poor kid too chicken to embarrass himself in front of real masters. Jiang Ziu quietly filed me under useless, never lend him money, and I let them because here's the truth. I did not want to go stand in a room full of hidden force masters and get scouted and remembered. My whole plan was to be the guy nobody remembers. Turning down a spotlight looks like cowardice right up until the day it looks like genius, and I could wait for that day. I'm very good at waiting. It's the standing on a stake training. I did make time for family, or my cousin's family. I brought pickled fish to my aunt's house, this sharp, bitter woman named Lai Fenghua and her gentle, beaten-down husband, and I noticed the bruises on his face. Turned out he'd finally shoved back at some gangster harassing my cousin and gotten stomped for it. And my aunt, who's convinced I'm swindling her daughter out of money, started in on me about the wages Manhua keeps handing me. Manhua defended me. That's my dowry, she said. I give it to who I want. And I watched this hard, greedy-seeming woman's eyes go red, and she snapped, "You think I'm after a few taels of silver?" And I realized she wasn't. She was terrified of losing her daughter, and being poor had just twisted that fear into something that came out mean. I smoothed it over, told her the fish was her favorite carp, my mother said so. Outside, I pressed more silver into my cousin's cracked hands. With interest, I told her. She said she'd hold it for me, for my wedding. I said okay, I did not have a wedding on the calendar. But some kindnesses you just let people give you, because taking them is its own kind of gift. At the river division, meanwhile, I got to quietly stretch my legs. 2 patrolmen were sparring in the yard one day, real fighters, and Hua nudged me to jump in. So I did, against a big guard named Hu Tao who used to work for one of the great families and had a genuinely nasty fist technique. And I want to be honest, I enjoyed this one. I flowed around his best moves like water around a rock, tied his famous 8-strike combo in a knot, and stopped my fingers an inch from his heart with the strike unspent. He stepped back, shook his head, and admitted he wouldn't have lasted 20 moves if I'd meant it. The patrolman stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Where does a fishmonger learn to move like that? And that right there was the sweet spot I lived in. Strong enough to win, careful enough that the only people who saw it were low-status men whose word carried nowhere. Show the fish, never show the whole ocean. Not everyone was as careful as me. My old friend Yuan Bo found me on patrol one day, dragged me into a corner, eyes shining, and told me he was in love. There was a girl, a performer, chained to a tea house and a cruel mistress, singing for coins she never kept, and she loved him truly, and all he needed was 30 taels to buy her freedom. No 10, actually 5. Actually, could I lend him 300 coins right now just for rouge so she'd know he was thinking of her? I could see the whole con from space. But he was my friend, and he was already too far gone to hear a word of sense, so I lent him the coins and hoped I was wrong. I was not wrong. Half an hour later, I watched the tea house toughs throw Yuan Bo into the mud, beaten and split-lipped, laughing that a penniless toad couldn't even afford the girl's rouge. And he crawled up, wiped his face, met my eyes, and told me not to misunderstand. She really did love him. It was the cruel mistress forcing her. Then he started dreaming out loud about taking her back to Dumb Bay to raise ducks. I didn't say anything. What is there to say to a man whose decided honey is worth drowning in? I just watched him limp off, still gripping that fantasy like it was the last dry thing in a flood, and I thought about how many different ways this world had of eating the people in it. A gang, alone, a smile. Yuan Bo picked the smile. It ate him just the same. Me, I kept my head down and fed my counters and helped the neighbors when I could. When the failing Zhao family got squeezed, my mother and I quietly sent them a bag of rice bran because I hadn't clawed my way up out of that mud to forget the people still stuck in it. And the months turned, and I grew, and my numbers climbed toward the second wall, and everything was almost peaceful. Which, in Dumb Bay, is always the sound of something bad winding up to swing. First, though, the school got its own earthquake. Zhao Ming broke through the second wall. Hidden force, in under a year. The dark, thin latrine duty kid was now a master, and the teacher was so proud his hands shook. He named Zhao Ming his closing disciple on the spot, the last and most precious student, the one who inherits everything, closer than a son. Zhao Ming's sister came and nearly knelt weeping, because in this world one person rising drags a whole family up with him, and the whole yard watched a peasant boy turn into royalty and felt the exact shape of their own smaller lives. One of the older students, a good man named Deng Long who'd been grinding at bright force for years without cracking the second wall, watched all of it and turned to me, and asked me quietly whether this whole heaven rewards diligence thing was just a cruel joke. Because he was living proof that working harder than everyone else didn't guarantee you anything. I didn't answer him. What was I supposed to say? That for him it was a joke, and for me it was a literal golden guarantee tattooed on the inside of my skull. Deng Long believed the exact thing I secretly knew was true, and it was destroying him, because the universe had promised him nothing and promised me everything, and neither of us had done a single thing to deserve our end of that deal. I just kept my mouth shut and kept grinding, and I felt like a thief the whole time. Then the real trouble came, and it came for the one person I'd promised myself I'd protect. My mother rushed in one morning, gray-faced. My cousin's father had been beaten, again. And when I got to the old house, I found out why. A new outfit called the Blackwater Gang had decided they wanted Lin Manhua. They were going to take her to the prefecture, to a place called New Workshop, dressed up as learning a trade, make lots of money. Everyone in that room knew exactly what that meant. It meant they were going to take my cousin away and never give her back, sell her into somebody's cage 100 miles from anyone who loved her. Her father had shoved back once when their men harassed her, and now they were making an example of the whole family, crushing them back into the mud for the crime of standing up straight. My aunt was screaming. My cousin was hiding at the cloth shop, not eating, eyes swollen from crying. I need you to understand what went cold in me, standing in that doorway, because it was different from the other kills. Jin Hai, Wu Lei, those were business, cleaning up threats to me and mine, and I'd done them with a clear head. This was Manhua, the girl who pounded frozen cloth until her hands cracked and bled and still handed me 2 warm eggs and her whole dowry. The one bright, warm, undeserving of any of this person this life had put in my path, about to be taken to a cage 100 miles from anyone who loved her, because some new gang decided she was worth a few coins and her family was too poor to be worth fearing. I didn't rage. Rage is loud and I don't do loud. Something quieter than rage settled over me, the exact temperature I'd felt with a tung-oil rope in my hands in a dark alley, and I thought very simply, no. Not her, whatever this costs, whatever I have to become, not her. And that was the moment I stopped being a boy who killed when he was cornered, and became a man who would walk into a room full of armed men on purpose for one person and burn it down to the floor. And the family, of course, turned to their golden boy, Lai Jun, the martial arts prodigy. Surely he'd know people, surely he could fix this. Now here is where I want you to appreciate the family's whole theory of the universe, the one they'd bankrupted themselves building. Lai Jun was the hope. Lai Jun would save them. And Lai Jun, at that exact moment, was over at his fancy martial arts hall making a discovery. All his drinking buddies and big-talking senior brothers scattered like roaches, the second real danger showed up. And the one connection who'd even pretend to help wanted 20 taels of tea money up front just to make an introduction. Lai Jun couldn't hand over 20 taels, so Lai Jun did what Lai Jun does best. He hid, and he stalled, and he decided not to go home that night. Their designated hero was a boy playing dress-up, and the wolves were already at the door. Meanwhile, the family's other grandson, the disappointment on the rotting boat, the one they wouldn't spend a copper on, was quietly doing what he actually did. I went to the Tiger Gang's smiling boss, Ma Dong, and got him talking about the local gangs, dropped the Blackwater name in the middle of a list of others so it wouldn't stick out. Here's what I learned. Around 20 men. 3 bright force fighters, and a leader named Jiang Hui, bright force at major achievement, near the edge of the second wall himself. They claimed some big inner-city backer, but the fact that they were out here trafficking people for pocket money told me the backing was thin. Shallow roots. 20 men and 4 fighters, the leader nearly at the second wall, against a kid who was still climbing the first one with a good fist and a blade manual and nothing else. So no, I wasn't going to challenge the Blackwater gang to a duel. I was going to end them. I started with the 2 lieutenants. I found them in Manhua Alley at night, the Blackwater gang's 2 bright force enforcers, cursing about the widow who kept slipping their grasp. My cousin, they meant, the little mouse who ran too fast. They were still complaining about her when I came out of the shadows with my waist knife, and it was over in 2 breaths, quiet, and neither of them ever knew who or why. I took what silver they had and left them for the dark. 2 down, and nobody had heard a thing. Then I went to their headquarters, and I want you to appreciate the plan because I'm a little proud of this one. Here is the whole trouble with taking 20 men at once, even for someone as unfairly built as me. It isn't the 20 men. It's the geometry. Kick the door in and they surround you, and then it doesn't matter how hard you hit, because a knife you don't see coming from behind kills a transformation master as dead as it kills a fisherman. You cannot fight a crowd. You can only fight the people at the front of a crowd, one at a time, if you can find a way to make them line up. So the entire game, every time, is to change the geometry before the first blow lands. Turn the mob into a line. Turn a fortress into a doorway. Turn 20 men who'd kill me together into 20 men I meet one confused face at a time. The boss, Jiang Hui, was sitting in his lit-up hall with the rest of his men, drunk and irritated, wondering where his 2 missing enforcers had gone. Now I could have kicked the door in and taken on 20 men and a near-hidden force leader all at once, which is a great way to become a very brave corpse. Instead, I rolled in the mud, smeared myself with blood, mudded my own face until I was unrecognizable, and I staggered through their front door, clutching my gut like a dying man, screaming that their brothers were ambushed over an old locust tree and needed help right now. For one beautiful second, the whole room lurched to their feet, ready to grab weapons and charge out into my little trap. For 1 second, Jiang Hui had survived a long time on paranoia and something snagged in his head. A gut-shot man fleeing for his life doesn't hold his stance that steady. A panicked voice doesn't stay that carefully rough. His head whipped around and he demanded to know who I actually was and where the blood on my knife had come from. Good question. Fast, though not quite fast enough. The wound I was clutching wasn't a wound. It was a hidden blade. And by the time he'd finished asking the question, I was already moving, and the room full of drunk men who'd all turned to look at me learned, one after another and much too late, that the dying beggar at the door was the thing they should have been afraid of. Jiang Hui was the only real fight, and he nearly took me. He was near the second wall, drunk but seasoned, and he had a nasty surprise, poisoned flying needles that came whispering out of his sleeve in the dark, a coward's weapon that has ended better men than me. The first burst nearly opened my throat. I felt one part my ear so close it stung. A boy still climbing the first wall does not, on paper, survive a near-second wall killer with poisoned needles in a black courtyard. On paper. But I'd spent that whole night preparing to be underestimated, and Jiang Hui made the same mistake his enforcers made, the same mistake everyone in this story kept making. He saw a fishmonger, and he brought his second-best effort. So when the needles came, I didn't dodge them, I took the wall. I put my fist through the mud brick beside me and brought a chunk of it down in a curtain to eat the darts out of the air. And then I was inside his guard before the dust settled. Hitting him with 2 years of guaranteed diligence, he had no way to have counted on. He was good enough to feel death arrive and break off and run, wounded into the alleys. And I ran him down because a wounded man like Jiang Hui is exactly the loose end that crawls back a month later and kills your mother while you sleep. He begged at the end. Don't kill me, take everything. They always beg at the end, these men who make their living off people who can't beg back. I thought about my cousin's swollen eyes and the cage 100 miles away they'd meant to put her in, and I didn't answer him. 50 taels of silver on the bodies, plus jade, plus a pouch of hidden weapons. But I want to be clear about what I actually walked out of that alley with, and it wasn't the silver. It was this. My cousin was safe. The men who were going to put her in a cage were gone, all of them, in one night, and she would never even know how close it came or who closed the door. She'd go on thinking the world just somehow decided to leave her alone, and that was the whole point. That's what the money was for. That's what all of it was for. I went home, burned my clothes, and washed the night off in the river, and I sat there catching my breath, and I made myself a rule because that fight had been closer than I liked. Avoid a fight if you possibly can. I only had 2 hands and 1 life, and this world was very full of poison needles. Do not go looking for trouble. I want you to hold onto that rule, by the way. Remember how firmly I made it. It's going to be extremely funny later, given how the rest of my night life went. Here's the part that still makes me laugh. The next morning, a county constable named Chen Jun walked into the Black Water Gang's headquarters and found it empty of Black Water Gang. And Chen Jun was furious, not because of justice, because the Black Water Gang had been his little cash cow, his protected earner, and somebody had wiped out his income overnight. He swore he'd skin the killer alive. So now I had a corrupt cop hunting me too. Great, adding it to the pile. Meanwhile, over at the old house, the family woke up to the news that the entire Black Water Gang had been massacred in the night. And Lai Jun, the golden boy, the hope, the one who'd been sent to fix this and had instead spent the night hiding outside because he couldn't scrape together 20 taels, came slinking home to find his whole family staring at him with tears of gratitude in their eyes. Because they'd decided he did it. Well, that his mysterious, powerful senior brother did it for him as a favor. And Lai Jun, cornered by all that hope and admiration, faced with the choice between admitting he'd hidden in a ditch all night or letting his family believe he was a hero, made the only choice a Lai Jun ever makes. He took the credit, muttered something about contacting his senior brother, and his family wept and hugged him and told him he'd saved Manhua's life, and the old man felt proud of him for the first time in weeks. The real person who saved her, of course, was eating breakfast on a boat 2 streets over, saying nothing. I could have been bitter about that. Honestly, I found it hilarious. Let the poser have the applause. Applause is loud, and I preferred to be quiet. But here's where the universe showed a genuine sense of comedy because that corrupt cop, Chen Jun, went looking for the killer, and the trail of gossip led him straight to the one person publicly taking credit for it, Lai Jun. They dragged my cousin off to a back room at the county office. And Chen Jun laid it all out, the 20 taels of tea money, the senior brother, the timing, and demanded to know how Lai Jun had wiped out a gang with 3 bright force fighters. And Lai Jun, who could not have wiped out a gang of angry ducks, wept and shook and swore he didn't do it. He only asked around. He hid all night, please investigate. So Chen Jun kicked him. Once. And the trembling, half-drained boy went across the room and coughed up blood, and Chen Jun looked at this useless, feather-light kid who couldn't survive a single blow from a hidden force fist, and reached the only sane conclusion. This idiot didn't kill anyone. He didn't have the qualifications to kill anyone. The real killer was some dangerous, unknown master, maybe even a cleaner sent by somebody powerful in the inner city. And Chen Jun suddenly decided that chasing that particular thread might get his own dirty laundry aired, or get him killed, and really, was a dead Jiang Huey worth it? He threw Lai Jun out the back gate like a dead dog and closed the case. So let's tally it up. My cousin took the credit for my kill and got worked over for it, and I got away clean, and a corrupt cop personally decided it was safer not to look for me. The poser stole my glory and it nearly killed him, and the invisible man stayed invisible. If there's a better argument for lying low than that, I have never heard it. Lai Jun wanted to be seen. Being seen got him kicked across a stone floor. I'll take the quiet, thanks. Life at the school kept teaching me who was who. Fang Qiang's wife had a baby, so I brought him a pair of little tiger head shoes my mother sewed by hand. Rough stitches, but made with real care. He grinned his big honest grin, invited me to the full moon feast, and even offered to find me a wife. I passed on the wife, but the rich students watched me hand over a cheap little gift to a friend and openly mocked Fang Qiang for wasting his time on a nobody like me. Zhao Ming included. That was the map of that yard in one moment. Loyalty on one side, contempt on the other, and me quietly memorizing which was which. Fang Qiang also gave me a warning, low and worried. The county was about to get interesting. Captain Q was coming back. Now I hadn't heard the name much yet, but I was about to. Not long after, the whole river division got mobilized to line the riverbanks, because the commandant of Jilin County, a man named Q Tianbao, was returning from mourning his parents. And for the first time, I got to see the real power map of this world, all in one place. Everybody came out for it. The 2 big gangs, Blood River and Iron Hand, with their scarred lieutenants. The escort agencies, the weapon shops, the martial arts halls. The 5 great families, the clans that owned the rice and the cloth and the oil and basically the throat of the whole county, sending transformation force masters like it was nothing. And every one of these terrifying people got quiet and respectful when a small black boat drifted up and a calm man in a blue robe stepped off. That was Q. Passed the scholar exam at 15, the martial exam at 18, killed the leader of the biggest gang in the county with a single palm strike, and came out of a sect called Wudai, which I learned was basically a country inside the country, splitting the region's taxes with the emperor himself, and keeping masters above transformation force on the payroll. Above transformation. There were people in this world cultivating something close to immortality, and they mostly lived up a ladder so tall I couldn't see the top of it. I stood there at the bottom of that ladder, a river patrolman worth 2 taels a month, and I memorized every powerful face in that crowd, and I felt exactly how small I still was. Bright Force had felt like a mountaintop from the bay. From here it was a pebble, but that was fine. That was useful even. A man who knows how small he is doesn't get himself killed reaching for things too heavy to hold. And the only door up that ladder, the only one, was the martial exam. Same door Yehua had shown me. Same door Q walked through, the one that was as hard as climbing to heaven. I decided I was going to climb it anyway, just quietly from the back, while everyone was watching the front. Then Deng Long broke. He tried his second breakthrough, the wall that had beaten him for years, and he failed, and this time the failure went deep, injured his foundation. There would be no more chances, and he knew it. He came and sat down next to me one evening with his bag already packed, and he told me the whole thing, quiet, no drama, like he was describing someone else's life. For years, he said, he'd believed that if he just worked hard enough, wanted it badly enough, the world would eventually be fair. So he trained harder than anyone, took the sneers as fuel, got up before dawn every single day. And it just didn't matter. It never got better. It got worse. And now every morning he opened his eyes and there was nothing over his head but black, not one crack of light, and he couldn't breathe under it anymore. He looked at me and asked if I knew what that felt like. To try that hard for that long and still have nothing in your open hands. And I want to tell you I said something wise. I didn't. Because I did know what it felt like in this body in that first month. And I also knew that I'd been handed a golden guarantee he would have traded his eyes for, and I hadn't earned it any more than he'd earned his empty hands. He believed in heaven rewards diligence with his whole broken heart, and the joke of it was that he was more diligent than me, and it saved him from nothing. He told me he wasn't useless because martial arts were useless. He was useless, he said. That was his conclusion after all those years. Then he stood up, patted my shoulder, told me I was the only person he'd ever met who worked harder than him, and asked me to promise him I'd succeed where he couldn't. And he picked up his bag and walked out the back gate, this thin figure in the morning light, like a dead leaf drifting off, and I never saw him again. I don't have a joke for that one. Some mornings the black really is all the way to the horizon, and no cheat code in your skull makes you deserve the one you got. I just stood there and let it hurt. Then I went and stood on my stake because the only thing worse than the guarantee would be wasting it. But I carried Deng Long with me after that, and I want you to understand why, because he's the key to the whole thing. Everyone loves a story about a hero with a cheat, rising, winning, slapping down the arrogant. I was living that story. But Deng Long was the other story, the true one, the one this world actually tells over and over, 10,000 times for every one of me. A man believes the beautiful lie they feed the poor, that if you just want it badly enough and work hard enough, the wall will open. So he pours his one life into it, every dawn, every copper, his family's whole future, and he grits his teeth through the sneers and calls them fuel, and he does everything right. And the wall doesn't open because the wall was never about how hard you knock. It's about whose bones you were born with and whose silver is behind you. And one gray morning he opens his hands and finds them empty and understands, all at once, that the fault was never in his effort. It was in the lie. Deng Long worked harder than me. That's the part I can never put down. He was more diligent, more devoted, more deserving by any honest measure, and he got nothing, and I got everything, and the only difference between us was a line of gold I did not earn, handed to me by a universe with a cruel sense of humor. So no, I never got to feel clean about my cheat. Every time that counter ticked up for free, some part of me saw Deng Long's thin back drifting out the gate. I kept climbing anyway, but I never once mistook the climb for something I deserved more than he did. That, I think, is the only thing that kept me from becoming just another smiling man with a knife scar. Speaking of people who deserved things they didn't get, let's check in on the golden boy. Lai Jun needed expensive medicine for his own breakthrough, blood energy pills at 5 taels each, and the old man had already pawned everything to fund him. So my aunt by marriage and the family hatched a plan. They'd borrow the money from 2 sources, from my other aunt's family and get this from my mother, the widow on the rotting boat. Take the savings from the orphan they wouldn't spend a copper on and pour it into the grandson they'd already spent a fortune on because he was the good investment and I was not. And the old man, guilt and pride wrestling in him, actually came to our boat to ask. He squeezed into that little cabin, this proud old feudal patriarch, sat on a stool that smelled of rice, bran, and damp wood and worked his way up to it. It was about Xiao Jun, the Chen family's only hope. He needed a blood energy pill, a once-in-a-lifetime chance, and could we possibly, maybe, help? And my mother stood up. I've told you she was small and tired and quiet, a woman who'd survived by folding herself down small. She did not fold this time. She pointed at the rotting cabin around us and she let it all out, everything, years of it, in a flood. Look at how we live. You call Xiao Jun the Chen family's only hope, but is why not your grandson too? His father was hauled off to a canal in your other son's place and never came home, and you left a widow and her boy to rot on a broken boat. I've gone near blind weaving nets. Why reached bright force eating rice bran, sweat mixed into porridge, and the silver that got him there was his cousin's dowry, money that poor girl saved for her own future and gave to us. And now you come to our leaky boat to ask us to fund Xiao Jun? Where do you think we keep the silver? In the cracks between the planks. The old man went gray. He couldn't get a word out. He stood up shaking, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one breath, and when I came in the door he flinched away from me and fled. And then my mother, tears still on her face, calmly wiped her eyes and told me the truth. She'd known exactly what she was doing. You can't argue with that old man, she said. He'll just call you selfish for ignoring the big picture. The only way to shut a mouth like his is to tear open your own wounds and make him look at them. so she'd done it on purpose. Bled in front of him strategically, because it was the one weapon a powerless woman had, and she'd aimed it perfectly. Then she put a bowl of warm beans in front of me and told me to eat while it was hot. That's my mother, underestimate her at your peril. I come by it honestly. The one bright spot in all of it came from Yi Hua. He wanted me to try my second breakthrough soon, and he went to his older sister, Yi Mei, who ran the family, to ask for more support. She said no at first, and reasonably. I was low talent, 3 months to bright force, and every promising kid she'd ever funded had washed out and cost her money the small family couldn't spare. Then she looked at her tired brother's face, sighed, and said, fine, it's a few taels, we're not paupers. 2 blood energy pills a month, kindness that cost the giver handed over anyway. I was collecting those people like other men collect grudges. And I intended to make every single one of them very, very glad they'd bet on the fishmonger. When the commandant put out a call for fighters to go clear some river bandits, big pay, real combat, half the school signed up and Zhao Ming led the charge, hungry for glory. I passed. Swords have no eyes, and I had no interest in bleeding for a stranger's cause. Let the ambitious go get their experience. I had a wall to break. Because with Yi Hua's blood pills and my own powder, my counters were racing now, and one night, alone in the empty yard, I felt my blood hit its peak and start to turn back on itself, and I knew it was time. The second breakthrough is nothing like the first. The first wall is about your skin and your blood. The second one goes into the marrow. It felt like being set on fire from the inside, flesh and bone burning to ash and the ash burning into pure breath, my pores clamping down, everything in me tearing apart to reconnect in a tighter, deadlier weave. Bright force roars out of you. Hidden force sinks in and goes quiet like a snake that stopped rattling. It hurt. It was supposed to hurt. And the longer I held on through it, the stronger the thing on the other side would be. Then, somewhere deep in the night, the fire banked. Everything reconnected, smooth, my blood pouring clean through skin and muscle and tendon and bone all at once, every pore breathing the cool, dark air. Tongbai stance. Major achievement. Hidden force. The second wall, in under a year from the day I first fell off a stake in 3 breaths. Zhao Ming, the golden prodigy, had taken about half a year to reach it. I was only a few months behind the best student the school had ever produced, and everyone thought I was sand. My body felt weightless. My control over my own blood had gone from a fist to a surgeon's fingers, a coiled, restrained power just waiting under my bones for a reason. Now I could have kept hiding it, but I'd learned something about lying low by then, and it's the thing most people who admire the idea get wrong, so pay attention. Lying low is a tool, not a religion. The point was never to be invisible forever. The point was to control exactly who sees exactly how much and when. Total secrecy is its own kind of trap because a man nobody values gets nothing, no resources, no teaching, no protection. So the real art isn't hiding, it's aiming. You stay dark to the crowd that would rob you or fear you or use you as a stepping stone, and you show one careful flash to the single person whose eyes can turn into meat and medicine and secrets in your hand. Hiding protects you. Showing at the right moment to the right person opens doors. So I let the teacher, and only the teacher, catch me practicing hidden force alone at night, and I let him be stunned, and I let it get me exactly what I wanted, which was resources and instruction, and to finally stop being invisible to the one man who could actually teach me something. Zule was genuinely shocked. He'd written me off as a grain of sand, and here I was at the second wall in under a year. He couldn't give me the star treatment. Zhao Ming was his closing disciple, and that was that. But he started slipping me blood-clotting pills every month, and better, he began actually teaching me. He even handed me a leather scroll, the fundamental diagram of Tongbei Fist's power, the real secret, the stuff you do not get for a few taels of monthly tuition. The moves that had felt inexplicable suddenly clicked into a system. He also let slip the shape of the ladder above me, that the truly high martial arts involve internal cultivation, above transformation force, the road to nourishing the body and lengthening your years, and the only way to reach it is to pass the martial exam and enter a sect. So, past the exam, everything kept pointing at the same door. Fine, message received. I also started doing to a new kid what Fang Qiang had once done to me. A poor boy named Song Yufeng, itinerant doctor's son, mother scrubbing pots at a restaurant, the exact flavor of broke I'd been, trained under me, and I coached his stance, and his fists the way I'd been coached, patient, detailed, no charge. I told him where his intent should sit in his fingertips instead of his fist. The same small thing Fang Qiang told me on my first cold day when I was dizzy with hunger, and he handed me 2 warm buns for no reason. I don't do this often, and I want to be honest that it wasn't pure charity. Part of it was strategy. The poor kids you're kind to on the way up become the people who remember you when you're strong. But part of it, the part I don't say out loud much, was that in a world that had shown me its teeth every single day, the 2 warm buns Fang Qiang gave a nobody stuck in me harder than any wall I ever broke. Pay it forward. It costs almost nothing, and in a place this cold, almost nothing is a fire. The list of good people had a way of growing when you fed it, and I had decided, somewhere along the way, that I would rather be on that list than off it, even now, even as the bodies piled up in the dark behind me. And then, walking home one night, 3 men tried to rob and kill me, and I have to tell you the timing could not have been funnier. Remember my rule? Avoid fights. Don't go looking for trouble. Well, trouble came looking for me on the one night I'd sworn off it in a dark street, and my newly sharpened hidden force senses heard it coming a full 5 zhang out. 3 professionals coordinated a grappling art called dislocating tendons and bones, the kind of men who did this for a living and had done it many times. They saw a fisherman in faded rags walking alone at night and thought, easy money. It was not easy money. I want to be fair to them. They were good. Not gang muscle, not desperate fishermen with a knife. These were professionals, 3 men who'd made a career of turning lone walkers into missing persons and had clearly done it many, many times. They worked as a single machine, one with a blade slicing for my ribs, one a battering ram of muscle sealing my exits, one with hooked fingers reading my joints for the grab that ends a fight in a heartbeat. They'd probably killed a dozen men just like the man I was pretending to be, a poor nobody in patched clothes walking home alone in the dark. And for the first 2 exchanges, they nearly added me to the pile. That grappling art of theirs, the tendon and bone breaking, is a horror up close, and twice their hands found me and I felt exactly how a rabbit feels when the net cinches. But here's the thing they didn't know, the thing nobody in Dumb Bay knew, the thing that was the whole quiet joke of my life. I had crossed the second wall that very afternoon. My blood had turned to something heavier under my skin, my body had become a different and colder machine, and these 3 career killers had picked, out of the entire dark city, the one lone walker in patched clothes who was actually the most dangerous thing on the street. So after they broke a couple of legs and wrists trying to grab a rabbit that turned out to be a wolf, I took their precious bone-locking art off the biggest one's own hands and gave it back to him, and I leaned in close and told him, dislocate tendons and bones. I can do a little of that too. The last one begged, spare me, take all our money. I told him even if he died, his money would still be mine. So he stopped begging and threw a poisoned dart at my heart instead, which is honestly the most honest thing anyone did all night, and it didn't work, and then it was over. I sank the bodies in the river with rocks tied to them, the thorough way, and I went home with 60 tails and 4 blood pills, 3 years of my river salary, off 3 men who decided a fisherman was easy prey. And I made a new rule, standing there in the dark, dead serious. I am absolutely never walking at night again. I want you to remember I made that rule too. I have a real gift for making rules on the exact nights I'm about to spend the rest of my career breaking them. Zhao Ming came back from the bandit hunt a hero. He'd seen blood, he was deadlier, and then he got invited to the commandant's victory banquet, rubbing elbows with the young elite of the whole county. The school buzzed like he'd been touched by a god. Everyone envied him. I thought he was a dead man walking, and I couldn't tell him. Here's the thing about Q's tree. It was tall and it threw a lot of shade, and everyone wanted to stand under it. But the taller the tree, the harder the wind hits it, and a commandant that powerful is a target for every knife in the county, seen and unseen. Cling to a man like that and you don't get his power. You get to be standing next to him when the lightning comes. Zhao Ming was climbing as fast as he could into the most dangerous spot in Jalen, grinning the whole way up. I stayed on my little branch near the ground, where the wind couldn't reach. Zhao Ming was also changing in uglier ways. He humiliated one of the rich students, Cao Yu, in a spar, no mercy, over a joke that he should just marry into the Luo family that funded him. And the gossip underneath the gossip was that Zhao Ming didn't want the Luo girl at all. He wanted Zhu Yu, the teacher's daughter, the Magnolia. The tight little clique of prodigies that used to run the yard cracked right down the middle in a few days. Power had turned the humble poor boy into something that couldn't stand to be laughed at and couldn't stand an equal, and I was quietly becoming his equal, which I filed away as a problem for later. Around then my own fist finally ripened. Tongbei Fist, major achievement, the level where one move flows into 10 and hard force turns soft, the level that only the teacher himself had reached in that whole school. Inside and outside united. I didn't announce it. I just quietly got a great deal more dangerous and kept my mouth shut about it. The world outside the yard kept turning, mostly for the worse. Yihua's family was getting squeezed off their own dock by a bigger merchant clan who'd hired a hidden force killer to settle it, and there was nothing the good man could do but give up half of what generations of his family had built. I tucked that away. A debt I owed him, and a wrong I might someday be strong enough to fix. And my friend Yuan Bo finally hit the bottom of his beautiful dream. He'd borrowed from loan sharks to buy his tea house girl's freedom. 5 taels ballooned to 20 in 3 months the way those debts always do. And when he couldn't pay, the thugs came and smashed his family's home and stole his mother's dowry hairpin off the wall. The whole bay found out at once. All those months of secret gifts to a girl who thought 300 coins weren't even worth a smile. I wasn't surprised. I'd watched it coming from the first day he grabbed my arm with that light in his eyes. But it still landed like a stone, because Yuan Bo wasn't stupid. He was just starving for one soft thing in a hard life. And this world had a special trap built for exactly that hunger. A gang eats you with a knife, a loan eats you with numbers, and a smile eats you while you thank it. Yuan Bo picked the smile, and it stripped him just the same, and I couldn't even be angry, only tired. The friends I'd started this life with were scattering to their fates. Wen Tao rising toward a clerk's post, the big man of Dumb Bay now. Ding Fan vanished. Guo Jing gone to another world entirely. Mei Lin, when I saw her, was a beaten-down servant who flinched at her own shadow and worried out loud about being late and getting punished. The outspoken girl I remembered sanded down to nothing by years in a rich family's cage. This world had a use for all of us, and the use was mostly to be worn down until there was nothing left to take, which is a cheerful thought to be carrying on the day of the River God Festival. That was the big one, Jalen's whole year of celebration crammed into one day, mugwort on the doors, stalls like mushrooms, crowds pouring off the riverbank into the city. I was on patrol at the wharf, watching for stampedes. I ducked into a tea house for a break and ran into Fang Qiang and Zhu Yu, out enjoying the day, and we shared a pot of tea while they gently tried to talk me into taking a better-paid post now that every faction in the county was bidding up fighters. Then a rival showed up, a talent named Zhao Yun from Songfeng Hall, a school with a decades-old blood feud against ours, and the air in the tea house went tight and careful. The tension in that tea house, though, turned out to be nothing, because outside at the festival the screaming started. Captain Q had been assassinated. At the festival, during the great river sacrifice in front of everyone, 8 masked killers burst out of the water with arrows and crossbows, and one of them ran the commandant through. The most powerful man in the county, the man who killed a gang boss with one palm, the man every terrifying face in the crowd had bowed to, cut down at his own ceremony. 5 of the assassins died on the spot. 3 got away. Q was carried off half dead, and the whole city slammed shut under martial law. I did the only smart thing there was to do. I stayed on the edge of it with old Lai from the River Division and kept my head down and helped move panicking people back, because when the sky falls on the powerful, the last place a river patrolman wants to be is close enough to catch a piece of it. The dead assassins turned out to be bandit chiefs, the survivors of the outfits Q had just crushed. Revenge. Except it was too clean, too precise. 8 men slipping through that security. That doesn't happen without inside help. This wasn't a bandit grudge. This was a knife somebody powerful had put in a bandit's hand, and the whole county was about to become a very unhealthy place to have opinions. Standing in that chaos, one cold thought went all the way through me. I had turned down every chance to climb Q's tree. Zhao Ming had spent months climbing it as fast as he could. And the tree had just been struck by lightning. Sometimes lying low isn't caution. Sometimes it's the only reason you're still breathing. The teacher pulled his top students in that night, warned us all to stay far away from the fallout, and to my quiet amusement, he named me in that group of elites. The whole yard's heads turned. The second deng long, the grain of sand, had somehow crossed the second wall. Congratulations rained down, warm and fake in the usual proportions. and Zhao Ming's eyes flickered when he heard it, and I watched a new calculation start behind them. He cornered me after. Did the whole fellow poor boy routine were the same, you and I, unlike these pampered clan brats, we bleed for every inch. Then he got to it. Stay by my side. Be my man. My trusted right hand. The offer had a smile on it and a leash under the smile. I told him I wasn't interested. And Zhao Ming's arm shot out to pin me where I stood, testing me, a sudden hidden force strike, and I met it with whip force Tongbei, and we hit dead even and both staggered back a step, which told him something he did not enjoy learning. The grain of sand could match the golden prodigy, blow for blow. Zhu Yu came around the corner just then, and Zhao Ming's face melted back into a gentle smile. Oh, I was just giving junior brother some pointers, and he strolled off. But in the half-second before the smile, I saw what was under it, and it was cold all the way down. I'd just made an enemy who couldn't stand an equal, and who was very talented, and who was one wall above me. Filed under deal with later. It got dealt with, not by me as it happens, but we'll get there. Now for the good part, the best thing that happened to me in this whole stretch. I told Yehua I'd reached hidden force, and the square-faced man laughed out loud and pounded my shoulder like I was his own son bringing home good news. Then he raised my support without me asking, 30 cattas of lean meat, 5 blood pills a month. And then he took me into his back room and showed me a small wooden box, and inside it, swimming in cool water, was a little palm-sized fish glowing pale gold with a raised horn on its head. A treasure fish, a golden-horned treasure fish. I grew up on the water. I knew the stories. These things are almost impossible to catch, guarded in deep water by monsters the old fishermen just called the Sea Elder, and 9 of every 10 men who go after one don't come back. A 10-year-old one sold to a great family once for 100 gold. This one was young, a year and a half, but its whole purpose was to nourish exactly what a fighter my age needed most, bone and blood, cheating my cultivation forward. And Yehua told me easy as anything that I'd get one every single month for a year. Let me put that in perspective. That is the treatment the 5 great families give their very best, top-grade bloodline prodigies. And it was coming from a small merchant family that was currently getting squeezed off its own dock, from a man who did the math on me and lost every time and helped anyway, because he decided I was worth it. I made the fish soup that night the way he told me, slow fire until it turned thick and gold, and I took one sip and my whole body lit up like a furnace. 3 times a blood pill at least. With enough of these, I could break the 3rd wall inside a year, which no sane person my age should even be dreaming about. And this is the part I want you to really understand, because it's the whole secret of me, and nobody in that county ever figured it out. Everybody else in this world is playing a gambling game. They eat the meat, they take the pills, they suffer on the stakes, and then they walk up to the wall and roll the dice, 20, maybe 30%, and most of them roll wrong and lose everything. Talent, luck, a rich family, a good attitude, that's what stacks the dice, and I had none of it. Medium-low bones, a rotting boat. A dead father and a widowed mother. What I had instead was a rigged table. Heaven rewards diligence doesn't roll dice. It banks. Every rep I put in, every bowl of that gold soup, every miserable hour on a stake that other men wasted their bodies on, my little counter just quietly ticked it up as guaranteed progress toward a breakthrough that would not, ever fail. So while the whole world burned resources gambling, I spent mine buying. The treasure fish wasn't a lottery ticket to me. It was fuel poured straight into an engine that never misfires. Do you see it? Give a normal genius a fish like this, and he gets a better chance. Give it to me, and he gets a certainty. That's not a small difference. That's the difference between a man praying at the Dragon King Temple and a man who owns the river. So I drank my fish soup down to the last golden drop. I felt my blood turn to something richer under my skin. And I thought about all those poor souls at Zhu Academy cracking their skulls against a wall I was going to walk through like a curtain, and for just a second I let myself feel exactly how unfair it was. Then I got up and went to stand on my stake. Because the beautiful thing about a rigged table is that it only pays out if you keep playing, and I have never once, in either of my lives, been the kind of man who leaves a winning hand on the table. And then, alone in the cabin with the lamp low, I did one more thing. I pulled a worn little booklet out of the deepest part of my bed frame and opened it. There were names in it, and a couple of them had small red check marks. Jin Hai. Wu Lei, I dipped the brush, and above them I wrote one more. Zhao Ming, not a check mark, not yet. Just a name waiting, on a list I always eventually finish. The martial exam came. The night before, over at the old house, the family was stuffing Lai Jun with every scrap of food they had, white buns, my aunt's precious eggs, the old man practically vibrating with hope, all their years and all their silver riding on the golden boy walking out of that exam a martial scholar. Lai Jun, meanwhile, had already prepared his excuse courtesy of his senior brothers. In the exam, they told him, skill matters, but luck decides. On the spot, accidents decide, so if you lose, it's not because you're weak, it's because heaven was blind. He practiced saying man proposes, heaven disposes until it sounded almost sincere. At my school, everyone knew who the real hope was. Zhao Ming, the prodigy at the second wall, the near-certain scholar. Nobody spared a thought for the boat kid. I want you to understand the crowd I was walking into. Hundreds of candidates at the city god temple, almost every one of them from a clan or a martial family, kids who'd eaten meat every meal of their lives and been trained since they could walk, plus a handful of freaks like me who'd burned generations of family effort just to stand there. The 5 great families lounged in the galleries. Even Guo Jing was there with her rich aunt, a well-kept woman named Madame Guo Malin, who took one look at the fisherman from Dumb Bay in the crowd and openly scoffed that a wild mudfish had no business on that field. Round 1 was strength, bows. They lined up stone bows from 1 stone all the way up to 12, and you drew what you could to full pull. 1 stone took 120 jin of force. Most candidates gasped and shook and managed a 4 or 5 stone bow a couple of times before their arms died. Even the school elites topped out around 7 or 8. Zhao Ming, the prodigy, drew the 9 stone bow cautiously, and everyone gasped, and his scholar's rank was basically locked. Then it was my turn, and I walked past all the safe bows, past the 9, and I put my hands on the 10 stone bow. The one Zhao Ming had tried once and managed exactly 1 time out of 10, so he'd played it safe with the 9. The 1200 jin of pull, the one that even a dark force master at his peak can't draw unless his fist technique has reached major achievement. The rich student snickered, attention-seeking peasant. Poor Zhu Yu looked worried I was about to blow my whole exam on a stunt. I set my feet, my blood roared up out of my bones, and I drew that bow to a full moon. You could have heard a pin drop if a pin could be heard over the sound of an entire field of people forgetting how to breathe. The mudfish, the grain of sand. Zhu Yu rubbed her eyes. Fang Qiang's mouth just hung open. Jiang Ziu, who told everyone I was a lucky fluke with no future, stared like the ground had moved. And Zhao Ming's little smile died quietly on his face. Up in the galleries, even Madame Guo Malin leaned forward because she knew exactly what a 10-stone bow meant, and it did not mean mudfish. Grade A, first round, top handful in the whole exam. My careful little cover, the one I'd guarded so hard for a year, came off in 1 pull on the biggest stage in the county. I want to be honest about why I did it because it wasn't a slip. I'd spent a full year being sand on purpose, turning down spotlights, letting people call me the second Deng Long, taking a loss to a girl's armpit rather than show my hand. A whole year of swallowing my own size. And a man can only do that for so long before something in him needs, just once, to be seen true. So when I put my hands on that 10-stone bow and felt 1200 jin of pull start to bend under my arms like it was made of green wood, and heard that entire field of clan prodigies and their sneering stewards go dead silent, I'll admit it, I drank it. Every rich kid who'd eaten meat since birth while I chewed rice bran, every steward who'd looked through me, every voice that ever said the fisherman's son should know his place, all of them watching the mudfish draw a bow their best could barely move. For 1 breath I wasn't lying low. For 1 breath I let the whole county see exactly what a year of guaranteed diligence builds when you pour it into a body nobody bothered to watch. Then I let the string go, and the bow screamed like thunder, and I put my quiet mask right back on. But I kept that 1 breath. A man's allowed to keep one. Worth it, honestly. A man's allowed to draw the big bow once. The second the round ended, the vultures descended. Stewards from the great families, merchants, gangs, all of them suddenly desperate to sign the fishmonger who could pull 10 stones and would probably make scholar. The Zhu family offered 30 taels a month, 2 blood pills, and a house on the edge of the inner city for a 10-year contract. 1 merchant offered me his daughter. I turned down every single one of them, polite and smiling, because I already knew that every gift like that came with a collar attached, and I'd rather draw a 12-stone bow with my teeth than wear one. Then Guo Jing dragged me over to her aunt, and Madame Guo Malin made her pitch. Come be the head guard of my household, she said. The Huang family has deep roots. Meat, medicine, connections, a smooth road, all of it yours, just serve me. And I understood the offer perfectly. It was the nicest, silkiest version of the same collar. Be my dog and I'll feed you well. I turned her down too, as politely as a man can. Her smile went cold as a knife. A mudfish in a wild river, she said, is still just a mudfish. It will never be a king. There will come a day when it regrets this. And Guo Jing stood there caught between us, wanting to chase after me and not daring to, because everything she had came from that woman, and I understood that too, and I felt bad for her, and I left anyway. Let me explain why I turned all of them down, because on paper I was insane. A house on the edge of the inner city. A merchant's daughter, 30 taels a month. These were offers that would have made most scholars weep with gratitude. And I said no to everyone, and I want you to understand it wasn't pride. It was arithmetic. The moment you take a powerful family's meat, you are wearing their collar, and a collar is fine right up until the day their interests and your survival point in different directions, and then you discover the leash was never yours. I'd spent my whole first life, and most of this one, watching what happens to people who let someone else hold the thing around their neck. My father wore the collar of an honest family name, and it dragged him to a canal. Guo Jing wore the collar of a rich aunt, and it was slowly strangling her in a gilded pavilion. Every guard, every retainer, every sponsored talent in that county was one bad season away from being thrown out in the cold like you and Jian would be. I would rather claw up the whole mountain alone, slowly, with my own 2 hands and no help, than reach the top fast on a chain someone else could yank. Kill me before you leash me. I've said it before. I meant it every time. I just learned an important lesson about the rich and their favors. They don't offer you a hand up. They offer you a leash and call it a rope. Round 2 was the fun one. Actual fighting. Duels and the details were deadly and changed every year at the examiner's whim. This year, live combat matches, and this is where people got carried out on stretchers. Madame Guo Malin, still stinging, sent one of her retainers, a man named Wang Hao, with orders to knock me off the stage in front of everyone and take my face and my grade with it. Fine. Noted. My first bout was against a weapon shop fighter named Yuan Tong, a real one, a hard-hitting combo of a man. I flowed around him, tangled his best strings, and beat him with a pulled punch that left him room to breathe. He thanked me for the mercy, because he knew I could have ended him and hadn't. Middle path. Win, but quietly, don't turn a scholar's exam into a body count. Then a roar went up from another ring, and I turned to see them carrying Zhao Ming off on a stretcher. The golden boy, the near-certain scholar. Broken. Bones and tendons deliberately snapped, twisted at wrong angles, mud and shoe prints on his expensive clothes, unconscious. He'd drawn Zhao Yun, the talent from the rival Songfeng Hall, the school with the decades-old blood feud against ours, and Zhao Yun hadn't come to win a match. He'd come to cripple the pride of our teacher's school, and he had. The teacher went white and rushed off with him, 10 years older in a breath. Now I noticed something the crowd didn't. A coincidence that wasn't. This year the exam wasn't run by the commandant. It was run by the county magistrate, a man tied to the very families that hated Q. And Zhao Yun just happened to draw the one student most tied to Q's rising favor. Zhao Ming didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he'd climbed the wrong tree, and the people who owned the ladder simply had it kicked out from under him. And a very cold question surfaced in me. If they'd aim a Zhao Yun at Zhao Ming, could they aim one at the mudfish who just pulled 10 stones? So I made a decision right there. Keep some cards face down. Don't win the way that gets you crippled. Stay boring, stay alive. Which brings me to Wang Hao and my favorite thing I did all exam. Wang Hao kept sidling up to me, friendly, fishing for my lot number so he could arrange to face me. Real slick. So slick I got suspicious, asked around, learned he'd left his old school under a cloud, and figured out exactly what he was doing. So I fed him a fake number. Told him I'd drawn Jia Guo. And Wang Hao, delighted, leapt onto the stage when Jia Guo was called and started loudly, publicly insulting his opponent as a piece of trash. A nobody, come up here and let me test you. Really put his back into the humiliation. Big performance. Except Jia Guo wasn't me. Jia Guo was Gu Anmin, the young lord of the Blood River Gang, a dark force master at major achievement, 3 years honing himself for the third wall, one of the most dangerous men in the entire exam. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, and gave Wang Hao a little wave. I want you to really savor the look on his face when it landed, because I certainly did. First, there was triumph. He'd cornered his prey and gotten to insult it in public. Then confusion, as the wrong man climbed the stage, a cold, quiet man in blood river colors instead of the fisherman. Then the slow, dawning, full-body horror as he ran the arithmetic and realized he'd just spent 5 solid minutes screaming trash, coward, come let me test you, into the face of the single most dangerous young lord in the entire exam, who had heard every word and who did not appear to have a forgiving nature. He whipped around to find me, and I just raised an eyebrow. Surprised, unexpected. This is a move I'm fond of, and you'll notice I keep coming back to it, so let me name it plainly. When your enemy is stronger than you do not fight your enemy. You find the thing that's stronger than both of you, and you introduce them, and you politely step back. I did it to Wu Lei with a note that pointed the Tiger Gang at his door. I did it to Wang Hao with a lie about a lot number. The strong men of this world are so busy measuring their own fists that they forget the deadliest thing in any room isn't the biggest arm. It's the person who knows exactly where everyone is standing and has decided to move them around. Gu Anmin broke him thoroughly in front of everybody, and Madame Guo Malin lost her retainer, her face, and her relationship with the Blood River Gang, all in one afternoon, all because she tried to have the mudfish knocked down. I didn't lay a finger on him. I just handed him a number and let the world do the rest. I won 4 bouts in a row, all narrow, all careful, all middle of the road, while the real killers around me maimed each other reaching for a top rank that came with an empty title and a target on your back. Not worth dying for. And then there was the last one I'll tell you about, because it is the least dignified victory of my entire life, and I stand by it completely. Her name was Bai Yu, a genuine talent from the Han family, soft, penetrating bagua palm, footwork like a fish. She was good. She was closing the distance on me, spinning in, arms spread to strike, and I was setting up to change my move when her arm came up and I got hit. Not by her palm, by her armpit. I want to be delicate here. It had been a long, hot, sweaty day of combat for everybody. And when she raised that arm, a smell rolled out of it with the force of a physical technique, a fishy, acid wall that walked straight up my nose and shut my whole body down. My movement just stopped. Out of pure survival, she didn't notice. She thought her footwork had found an opening, and she flicked a light little finger strike at my wrist, a feather-soft tap meant to just nudge me back. So I sold it. Oh, I sold it like my life depended on it, which, given the armpit, it kind of did. I groaned. I went pale. I staggered back, clutching my perfectly fine arm, sweat pouring, trembling like her feather flick had shattered my meridians. I gasped out that Miss Bai was too skilled, I concede. Then I fled that ring as fast as my legs would carry me, which was very fast because I was escaping a biological weapon. Grade B, loss. And the whole crowd erupted about the terrifying hidden power of the Han family's soft palm, how a light flick could devastate a man, what a fearsome young talent Bai Yu was. And Bai Yu stood there, bright red, understanding perfectly what had actually happened, winning the most humiliating victory of her career, unable to say a single word about it because what was she going to do, announce to the county that I'd fled her armpit. A gentleman keeps some secrets. This is one of hers I'll take to my grave, right after I tell all of you. Back at the school, the mood was a funeral. Zhao Ming had woken up, and it was bad. Tendons severed, barely able to stand, and fixing it would take a medicinal fish over 20 years old worth more than 1,000 gold, the kind of miracle that does not grow in a poor man's soil. The teacher was spending everything he had and bringing in the finest doctors in the county, and Zhao Ming lay there gripping his sleeve and begging, "Master, I'll do anything. I am your only hope. Please make me whole again." I stood in that yard and looked at the crippled prodigy, the boy who'd climbed the tall tree as fast as he could, the one who a month ago wanted me to kneel and be his dog. The wall he'd cleared in under a year meant nothing now, and I thought about that name I'd written in my little book, and how the world had gone and half-crossed it out before I'd even lifted a finger. I didn't gloat, I just noted quietly how fast the highest branch becomes the shortest drop. Then the messenger came running. He clung to the gate, gasping, face split open with joy, and he shouted my name. 39th place, Lai Y, Martial Scholar. The whole school erupted, and even though everyone had half expected it after the 10-stone bow, the word scholar still landed like a thunderclap, because it changes everything. Tax breaks, official standing a door into the prefecture, a life that no gang, no clan, no smiling barrel with a knife scar can casually step on anymore. Cao Yu's face curdled with regret. The veterans who'd failed for years watched their impossible dream walk past them wearing my face. And the yard that had called me the second Deng long lined up to hand me water and call me senior brother and give me the best lit spot to train. Funny how that works. When you're weak, quiet is dullness and a bad temper is low breeding. When you're strong, the exact same quiet is depth and the exact same temper is character. People don't change their eyes, they just change what they're looking at. But the real show, the one I'd have paid gold to watch in person, was happening back at the old family neighborhood. See, the news of a Chen family scholar reached them before the details did. And of course, every last soul in that neighborhood assumed the scholar was Lai Jun, the golden boy, the one the old man had bankrupted himself for. So the whole street poured into my grandfather's little courtyard to celebrate, dragging out congratulations and a feast. My grandfather stood there with tears of pure joy running down his wrinkles. And my aunt straightened her spine and announced to everyone that she'd always known her Zio Jun would do it. He'd been clever since he was small. She even tipped the messenger boy a few coins and told him to say some auspicious words for her Zio Jun. And the messenger boy, a slow, honest kid named Ah Guang who'd read the notice himself, took the coins and cheerfully congratulated Grandpa Lai Wai on becoming a scholar. Lai Wai. The courtyard went so quiet you could hear the beans settle in the bowl. My aunt's face went from triumphant red to pale to a shade best described as pig liver purple. My grandfather's joy froze solid on his face and then drained out of it as he aged 10 years standing up. And Ah Guang, bless his uncomprehending heart, when they frantically asked if he was sure, if maybe it was Lai Jun, insisted no. He'd read it 3 times. It said Lai Wai from Dumb Bay, the one who lives on the broken boat. The one they wouldn't spend a copper on. The one they sent my mother to be squeezed for money to fund the other grandson. That one was the scholar. The neighbors' faces shifted all at once into sympathy and embarrassment, and underneath, the faint, helpless delight of watching a proud family slap itself in front of the whole street. My aunt's tip money had just become the most expensive joke in the neighborhood, and the whispers drifted out on the wind as everyone fled the scene. So biased, that old man. If only they'd been kinder to the widow and her boy. Poor child, out on a broken boat, and look at him now. My grandfather sat down on his cold steps in the wreckage of the party he'd thrown for the wrong grandson and let a handful of golden soybeans slip through his fingers, like the good fortune he'd been so sure he was holding. I did not throw that party. I did not say one word to make it happen. I just stopped being invisible for one afternoon, and the family's own lie collapsed on top of them under its own weight. That's the cleanest kind of revenge there is. You don't have to lift a hand. You just have to become the thing they swore you'd never be, and let them realize, all at once in public, exactly what they threw away. Meanwhile, on the water, they came for my mother the right way. Officials with gongs, red robes, a lacquered tray, marching into Dumb Bay to announce that Master Lai Wai of Dumb Bay had passed the martial exam, 3rd tier, 7th place, and to pay their respects. The clerk who used to squeeze fishermen for taxes now bowed lower to my mother than he'd ever bowed to anyone, and announced her household exempt from labor and poll tax for 2 years, and taxed at a fraction from now on, an act of imperial grace. My mother, who had folded herself small for so many years, straightened up in that boat door with tears pouring down her face, and the whole dock, all the aunts and uncles who'd watched this kid grow up in the mud, knelt. Uncle Zhao went down first, kowtowing to Madam Chen, and the rest followed like a wave. She hurried to serve the officials a bowl of white flour paste, the good stuff she'd never let herself eat, hands shaking, and they took it with a smile and called it lucky noodles and wished her son a bright future. That's the one I let myself feel all the way. No jokes. My mother, near blind from weaving nets, who licked the oil off vegetable soup to save a copper, who wove until midnight for a tuition she could barely reach, standing in that doorway being bowed to by the men who used to bleed her. The widow and the orphan, off the very bottom of the quagmire at last, in front of everyone who'd watched them drown there. Everything I'd done in the dark had been for that bowl of white porridge and that straightened spine. If lying low was the road, that was the reason for walking it. I stood in the crowd and I let it land, and I didn't say a word, because the man who did all of it wasn't supposed to be visible, and honestly, watching from the edge was the best seat in the house. The teacher, properly impressed now, handed me more of himself. Real instruction, real secrets, and a picture of the road ahead. Refine my hidden force to perfection, then someday attempt the third wall, transformation force, the level the great families and the two big gangs treat as an honored guest. And above even that, the internal cultivation of the sects, the thing that stretches a man's years, reachable only through the exam I just passed. The door was open now. I just had to keep walking. First, though, I did two small things with my new life. I moved my mother, and I drew a line under my family. Gifts had poured in after the exam, neighbors, the Tiger Gang, and 10 tails from Manhua, so I had enough. I bought a little courtyard on Champing Street, just across the river from the inner city, near the school, near my senior brother's safe. A well, an old locust tree, a heavy camphor wood door with a bolt a thief couldn't chew through, and I took my mother off the boat. She fought me on it, of course. The boat is peaceful, she said. Houses are a waste. My father had nearly died for those 2 rotting boats, and to her they were home. But I walked her through that camphor door into the yard, and I drew her a bucket of sweet well water, and I watched her run her rough hand along the cold edge of the well and touch that heavy bolt, and something in her let go that had been clenched her whole life. A widow who drifted on the water forever, finally standing on ground that was hers. She said, "This place is nice." I have never been prouder of a sentence. The days after that were the quietest of my whole life, and I've never told anyone how much I loved them. My mother could not sit still in that yard. For 20 years she'd measured her worth in fishing nets woven per night, and now there was no net to weave, so she reorganized. She scrubbed a floor that was already clean. She planted things in pots. She befriended the constable's wife next door and came back with gossip like she'd struck gold. She learned that in a real house, a woman could keep a real fire going all day, and she kept one going all day, and she looked at me eating a bowl of thick rice by that fire like she still expected the whole thing to dissolve if she blinked. One evening she caught me by the well and asked, real quiet, whether it was true, that people were sending me silk and silver just because I could do that thing, that transformation. And I said, "Yes, mother, it's true," and she didn't cheer. She sat down on the well's cold edge and cried, the way people cry when a thing they gave up hoping for arrives anyway and they don't quite trust it. Then she wiped her face, and she went and got the tiger head shoes she was sewing for Fang Qiang's baby, and she picked up the needle, because a woman who has survived by working her hands does not know how to celebrate except by making one more small good thing for someone else. I sat with her in the firelight and let her, and I didn't say a word, and it was, hand on my heart, better than every wall I ever broke. That's the thing nobody tells you about clawing your way up out of the mud. You don't do it for the silk or the silver or the bowing stewards. You do it so your mother can keep a fire going all day and stop flinching when someone knocks on the door. Everything else was just the price of that fire. I'd have killed twice as many men for it and slept exactly as well. As for the family, I paid a visit to the old man. He was all warmth now, tea and malt candy, and my uncle suddenly full of sweet words, the whole performance. And I let him perform, and I said very little, and when I left I put the gifts they'd sent me back down on their table, untouched, everyone. A clean line, drawn in silence. The old man understood it perfectly. He forbade the family from ever leaning on me again. If Ah Wai wants to help, he'll help, he told them. If he doesn't, leave him be. He'd finally learned exactly how much of me they'd thrown away, and exactly how little of it they were getting back. Just enough of the family name shine to be careful with. Nothing more. And the debt I cared about most, the world paid on its own. My cousin's cloth shop had a cruel head housekeeper who'd been grinding Manhua down in the freezing dye room for refusing to be married off as an unpaid servant to the owner's dull grandson. Then one day the young master of the shop walked into that dye room, threw the cruel woman out on the spot, and named Lin Manhua the new manager. And on his way out he said, "Please give my regards to Brother Chen." Brother Chen. Me, my name, spoken like a shield, had reached into a place I never even went, and lifted my cousin up out of the cold water she'd been drowning in since before I met her. She'd given me her whole future, one frozen coin at a time, and now the mere weight of what I'd become had handed hers back. That's interest. That's the debt paid, and then some, exactly like I told her it would be. She never even knew I was the reason. That was the best part. So there I was, scholar. Home, mother safe, cousin lifted, family put in its place. For about a day and a half, I let myself believe things were settling down. Then the whole tiger gang got wiped out in a single night. Every one of them. Ships burned to charcoal, shacks collapsed, no survivors, no trace of who did it. And I stood on the dock with a very cold feeling because I knew that pattern. That was somebody thorough, somebody who cleaned up after themselves, somebody a lot like me. The next day, a big, friendly new man showed up, said his name was Wu Yang, said he'd just taken over the fish market, and came to congratulate the new scholar with a fat purse of silver, fishing, oh so casually, for what I knew about the Tiger Gang's massacre. And the name snagged in my head. Wu Yang, Yang. The Tiger Lord that the dying Wu Lei had promised was coming back, Wu Lei's nephew, the backup plan. Here's what had happened, and I pieced it together fast. Wu Yang was Wu Lei's nephew, raised by him, funded by him. He'd come home, found his uncle murdered, and torn the Tiger Gang apart in one night to avenge him, because everyone thought the Tiger Gang killed Wu Lei. Except before Ma Dong died, he told Wu Yang the truth. The Tiger Gang didn't land the killing blow. Somebody else did, somebody who used the Tiger Gang as a weapon, framed them, and vanished without a trace. Somebody meticulous, somebody who knew Dumb Bay inside out. And Wu Yang was standing in front of me, smiling, weighing whether the fishmonger-turned-scholar who'd conveniently risen during all these convenient deaths was that somebody. And I heard, when I followed him after, exactly what he planned to do next. Hire a famous retired detective, a real crime solver known across the whole prefecture, an old constable named Guo, to dig up the truth no matter the cost. A famous detective. Pointed at me? That is the one thing a man who kills quietly in the dark cannot allow. So I didn't allow it. I caught Wu Yang and his two men in an alley, and he was a real master, seasoned, dangerous. He saw the ambush coming and fought like a cornered tiger. But I'd crossed the second wall, and he hadn't, and hidden force is a cruel, silent thing when it sinks into a man. It was closer than I liked. It was overall the same. On his body I found 70 tails, 9 blood pills, and a leather scroll, another cultivation manual, the toad fishing energy, just handed to me by the last man who ever came looking for the truth about me. I erased the traces and vanished the way I always do. But walking home, I felt something I hadn't felt before, because Wu Yang was right. Every boss I buried left someone behind who loved him. Jin Hai had a brother-in-law, Wu Lei had a nephew, and that nephew had come within one hired detective of pulling the whole thread and finding me at the end of it. This is the part they never tell you about killing quietly in the dark. The dark is not empty. It's full of other people who loved the men you put in it. And they don't forget. They add up your convenient little deaths in a way the daylight never bothers to, and sooner or later one of them is smart enough or angry enough or rich enough to hire the right pair of eyes. I'd been telling myself I was invisible. Wu Yang taught me the truth. I wasn't invisible. I was just so far luckier than the people looking. A shape was forming in the corner of the county's eye, a pattern, a quiet fisherman near whom powerful men kept turning up dead, and one day someone was going to look straight at it and see me whole. The lying low that had carried me this far had a shelf life. I could feel it starting to run out. The scroll off Wu Yang turned out to be a gift. Toad fishing energy, an internal art, 3 stages, and the whole point of it was to turn your insides into armor. Swallow breath into your gut until it swells and hums like a frog, and your organs go from wet paper to boiled leather. Tough enough to eat a bright force fist to the belly and shrug it off, then tough enough to swallow a chunk of a hidden force strike. A whole extra layer of not dying, wrapped around the parts of me that got people killed. I lit the counter and started practicing it at home, where the teacher wouldn't ask where I got it. Around then the Grand Canal Commissioner himself, a man named Du Wanley, sent for me, because a river patrolman who pulls 10 stones and passes the exam gets noticed. He offered me a real military post, river inspector, hunting bandits at a place called Black Stone Beach, big rank, big danger. I turned the dangerous part down flat, all humble. My foundation is shallow, I'd hate to fail you, sir. He grumbled and settled for promoting me to a cushy temporary river commissioner instead, triple pay, no more daily patrols. Perfect. More rank, less risk, more time to grind. Lying low professionally. Then the debt I actually cared about came due. Remember Yehua's family getting squeezed off their own dock? It got worse. The rival Wu family hired a killer named Song Kingshan, mountain-breaking hand, dark force at major achievement, 1 wall below transformation and famous for it, and he killed 2 of the Cheng family's own masters. The whole dock, generations of Cheng blood and sweat, was now going to be decided by a single death match on a stage. Win, and it's yours. Lose, and you're gone forever. The Cheng family had exactly one talent they'd poured a fortune into, a fighter named Yuan Jian, crippled in a failed breakthrough and supposedly mostly healed. They begged him to fight. And Yuan Jian, who'd eaten their treasure fish and their medicine for years, looked at Song Qingshan's reputation and suddenly discovered his old injury was much too tender to risk. He said no. Left them to drown. So Yi Hua came back to me gray-faced and told me the family's foundation was gone and that he was so sorry but he'd have to cut my support. His dock was being torn away, his family was facing ruin, and the thing weighing on him was that he might not be able to feed the fishmonger anymore. And I did the math. With my counters, with toad fishing energy wrapping my organs in leather, against an ordinary dark force master at major achievement, I put my odds over 98%. So I said, boss, I'll take the match. He spun around like he'd misheard. You really? And I told him the simple truth. The Cheng family had carried me since the day I was nobody, fed me meat when I ate rice bran, doubled it without me asking, handed me a treasure fish worth more than their own comfort. You don't take all of that and then stand in the crowd and watch the man who gave it drown. That's not who I was, that's not the list I keep. I've told you about my little book, the one with the names and the red check marks. Jin Hai Wu Lei, the men who ground the people I loved. But there's a second list, and I keep it just as carefully, and it doesn't live in a book because I don't need to write those names down. Yi Hua is at the top of it. Do you understand what he actually did? A square-faced man who ran a boring river post looked at a fatherless boy with medium-low bones and no future, and against every sensible instinct his own sister had, he decided to feed him. Not because I could do anything for him. I couldn't not then. He did it because his son was about my age, and the world had been unfair to me, and he was, underneath all that river dust, simply a decent man in a place that eats decent men alive. Every other soul in that county who ever helped me did it after I was worth helping. Yi Hua did it before. That's the whole difference between the two lists, and it's the only difference that has ever mattered to me. So when his family's whole world was about to be torn away, and their pampered talent had suddenly discovered his injuries were too delicate to risk, there was no decision to make. There was just a debt, and a chance to pay it with my own two hands, and a quiet, private satisfaction that the boy nobody bet on was about to be the reason the one family that did got to keep everything. His eyes actually stung. This small merchant family that had bet on me because I was diligent and grateful and nothing else was about to find out exactly how good that bet was. I asked him for one thing: get me the mountain-breaking hand manual. Not to learn it, to read my enemy's grammar before he opened his mouth. They fought these things on a stage at the dock, merchants under the awnings, the whole future of two families riding on it, and a life-or-death contract already signed. Song Qingshan stood across from me like an iron tower, and he did something I didn't expect. He didn't sneer. He looked at me, a stranger he was about to try to kill for a paycheck, and said it was a cruel twist of fate, two men with no grudge meeting on this stage. And I told him the road is narrow and a man doesn't always choose what he does on it. He heard that for exactly what it was. No hard feelings, only fists now. He nodded and the last softness left his face and the gong rang. He came like a hawk dropping on a rabbit, going for my throat, and he was fast and he was good, everything the reputation promised. Steel hook claws that break tendons, the same trick that had crippled one of the Cheng masters, cone fingers driving at the killing points between my ribs. If I hadn't read his manual, I'd have been reading it off the inside of my own broken arm. But I had read it, so I flowed. Snake probing the way, monkey circling the branch, let his killing claws slide off greased skin and tear nothing but my sleeve, and answered every line of his grammar with a comma of my own. We traded dozens of blows and shattered the stage under us, and the crowd that came to watch a slaughter went dead quiet watching a war. Then he landed one. A cone strike straight into my ribs, a vital point, the kind that ends a man, and I let it land because I had leather where he expected paper. My toad fishing energy ate it. His killing blow thudded into me like a fist into a drum, and I was still standing, and I saw the exact half-second where his whole face said, "That should have worked." That half-second was the fight. I stepped inside the next punch instead of away from it, took a glancing hit on the shoulder that would have caved a normal man, hooked his driving arm, sank my hips, and turned all my counters loose at once. And then it was over, the way these things are always over, fast and ugly and final, and Song Kingshan went down and did not get up to fight again. He was a killer for hire, and he'd have crippled me for a paycheck without blinking. But he wasn't evil, just a blade someone rented. And at the very end, being carried off, he turned his fading eyes to the woman who'd hired him and used the last of his voice on the only thing that mattered to him. My son is 3. My daughter is 5. Take care of them. I didn't have a joke for that one either. Some men on the wrong end of my fists were monsters. Some were just fathers who took the wrong job. I let it sit, and I didn't pretend it didn't weigh something, because pretending is how you turn into the barrel with the knife scar. I've never been able to build a clean line between the men I've killed and told myself I could. Jin Hai, Wu Lei, Jiang Hui, those were easy. Those were men who fed on people who couldn't fight back, and I've never lost a wink over them. But Song Kingshan looked me in the eye first and told me it was a cruel twist of fate, no grudge between us, just the narrow road forcing our hands, and he was right. And I killed him anyway, and his last breath went to 2 small children who'd never know their father died so a merchant family could keep a dock. This world is a machine for turning honest men into weapons and then breaking them. My own father was a version of it, dragged off honest to die on a canal. Song Kingshan was another, a father with good hands who took a bad contract to feed his kids. I keep both of them somewhere I can feel, because the day I can't feel them anymore is the day I've become the thing I climbed out of the mud to bury. The dock erupted. Cheng family wins, generations of their foundation saved. Yimei, the sister who'd almost refused to fund me, sat there stunned, and Yihua ran up onto the broken stage and grabbed my arm laughing and near crying, asking where I was hurt. I told him it was nothing. I lied, actually, toad fishing energy or not. That man hit like a landslide, but a scholar with a reputation for lying low doesn't advertise his bruises. A girl from the Wu camp tried to make trouble, jumped up to scold me for being too vicious, hoping to bait the injured hero into a fight she could win to make her own name. Turned out she was planted from Songfeng Hall, the feud school, always the feud school. Madam Wu, an honest loser, shut her down and apologized and left with grace. I filed Songfeng deeper in the cold drawer. They kept trying to use me as a step stool. One of these days I was going to get tired of it. The Cheng family did not stay stingy. 300 taels of silver notes, 20 top-grade blood pills, monthly support tripled again. Yimei told her brother it was the best investment the family had ever made, and she was right, and I intended to keep being right. Even the ungrateful Yuan Jian, scrambling to fix his own reputation, sent me a gift to look grateful adjacent. Everyone was suddenly very interested in being my friend. Funny how a dead master on a broken stage does that. I went home that night and my mother had porridge on the stove, and when I lifted the lid it was thick, not thin enough to see my face in. Thick, with rice you could chew, in a bowl in a courtyard that was mine, in a house with a bolt no gang could break. I sat down next to her and ate the whole bowl, and I thought about the first bowl, the one I could see my hungry reflection in, back on a rotting boat a lifetime ago. Same porridge, different world. That's the whole story, really. Everything I'd done in the dark, every name in the little book, every wall I'd climbed, it all just meant the porridge got thicker and my mother got to stop being afraid. Turns out that was worth more than any of it. But I'm getting sentimental, and the night wasn't done teaching me things, because back at the school, the golden boy I'd once written into that little book was about to save me the trouble entirely, because Zhao Ming's tendons stopped healing. For a while, the teacher's expensive secret medicine had seemed to work, and everyone dared to hope. Then it just stopped. The doctor admitted it. The prodigy who'd crossed the second wall in under a year was going to be a cripple for the rest of his life, and slowly everyone let him understand it. And I watched the golden boy find out, one abandonment at a time, exactly what he'd been to all these people. First, Jiang Ziu, the rich girl who used to shoot him flirty looks when he was rising, cut off his funding and told him to his face he wasn't even fit to guard her family's gate anymore. Don't bother me. Then the senior brothers who'd flocked to him built their little invisible wall. And then he made his last, worst mistake. He reached for Zhu Yu. He'd loved her the whole time, the teacher's daughter, the Magnolia, and now, broken and desperate, he grabbed her sleeve and begged. I know I'm useless now, but give me a chance. I'll spend my whole life being good to you, just believe me. And Zhu Yu, gentle as she was, told him the truth as kindly as truth allows. You are my junior brother. That is all you have ever been. That is all you will ever be. And something in Zhao Ming just snapped. He started laughing, this awful cracked laugh, and it all came pouring out. He rounded on the teacher when the old man came running, and he said the thing that had been rotting under everyone's polite hope for weeks. You knew the medicine was useless. You lied to me. All that talk about loving me like a son, it was garbage. You only ever wanted my good bones so I could break the second wall and take your enemy's blows and nurse you in your old age. I was a tool. And if you actually cared, you'd go kill Zhao Yun and avenge me instead of feeding me grass and bark. Here's the terrible thing. He wasn't entirely wrong. That is what a closing disciple partly is in this world, a shield and a retirement plan wearing the word son. And the teacher knew it, and it landed on the exact guilt he'd been drowning in because Zhao Yun had crippled the boy to spite him, so it really was in part his fault. The teacher's face went to ash. He told Zhao Ming he was arrogant and vicious, and that out of respect for what they'd been, he'd spare his life, but he was no longer a disciple. And Zhao Ming spat back, "You old bastard. Now that I'm crippled, you've finally dropped the mask." And that broke something in the old man, too. He crossed the room faster than I could see and struck Zhao Ming once, an iron palm that threw him into the wall, and then he stood there heaving, and I watched Zhu Lei age 10 years in one breath for the second time in a month. He said quietly, "Send him home." And he walked out with his back bent, and I understood I was looking at an old man who'd bet his whole future on one boy and lost, and had just hit that boy, and knew he deserved to be hit back. I stood in the corner through all of it, calm, silent, my face doing sad in all the right places, and I felt a very cold thing happen in my chest. Because I'd written Zhao Ming's name in my little book with my own hand, and I hadn't lifted a finger. The world had taken the golden prodigy, the one who wanted me to kneel, the one who couldn't stand an equal, and it had crippled him, abandoned him, humiliated him, and cast him out into the cold, all on its own, while I just watched. A few days later he came back to the yard one last time, and it was worse than the crippling. He'd lost his mind. Barefoot on the frozen ground, clothes torn and stained, swinging a dead branch at armies only he could see, screaming that he was a martial scholar and this place belonged to him. And the same rich students who'd once fought to sit near him, who'd sent him flirty looks and laughed at his jokes, now held their noses and stepped away and muttered about heaven's justice. Jiang Ziu said he stank and walked off. His sister came, the one who'd raised him alone on nothing, who a year ago had wept with joy watching him become the closing disciple. She half-carried her raving brother out through the snow while she sobbed. The teacher pressed a purse into her hand without a word, and that was the end of Zhao Ming. I thought about the outhouse the first month, when he and I were both just poor kids assigned the dirtiest jobs, scrubbing the same filth side by side, 2 grains of sand nobody expected anything from. And I thought about how fast he shed that skin the moment he got a little power, how quick he was to sneer at the poor kids he'd just stopped being, how badly he needed to be somebody after a lifetime of being no one. I understood it. That hunger nearly ate me too, the day I drew the 10-stone bow. The difference is I kept mine on a leash and he let his run, and it ran him straight up the tallest tree in the storm. Some names you have to cross off yourself, and some the world crosses off for you if you're patient, if you stay quiet, if you keep your head down and let the tall trees fight the wind while you grow in the shade. I closed the book on Zhao Ming without ever picking up a knife. The highest branch really is the shortest drop, and he'd climbed so fast, and I'd watched him fall the whole way down, and I felt almost nothing, and that, more than anything, told me how much this world had already changed me. The next morning, Zhao Ming came back to the school. Barefoot on the frozen ground, clothes torn and stained, screaming that he was a martial scholar, and this place belonged to him, sweeping a dead branch through the air-fighting armies only he could see. The prodigy had broken all the way, and the same rich students who'd once fought to sit near him now held their noses and stepped away, and Cao Yu sneered about heaven's justice, and Jiang Ziu said he stank and walked off. His sister came, the one who'd raised him alone on nothing, and half-carried her ranting brother out while she sobbed, and the teacher quietly pressed a purse into her hand without a word. I watched the whole thing from the corner with my sad face on. A few months ago, that yard had knelt to him in spirit. Now it couldn't wait to smell him leaving. That's the market rate on being useful, paid out in full. My mother, meanwhile, was busy trying to marry me off. Every matchmaker in the district had discovered the scholar on Champing Street, and she found one she liked. A shopkeeper's daughter named Ruo Lan, pretty, gentle, could read and keep accounts. My mother ran around all day checking it out, and then came home troubled because she'd learned the girl's heart wasn't free. Ruo Lan had loved a poor scholar 2 years back, and her snob of a father had torn them apart, and the girl had gone on a hunger strike and never recovered. and now the family wanted her married off fast to bury the whole thing. My mother didn't care about the girl's past. She cared that I'd be marrying someone whose heart was already spoken for and buried. Wise woman. I told her marriage wasn't a thing to rush, and she sewed the rest of my jacket with the relief of someone who'd set down a heavy stone. I wasn't building a life to hand it to someone who'd wince every time she looked at me. My foundation wasn't even set. Neither, apparently, was my heart. That could wait. Then 2 of the teacher's old friends came by with warnings, and both of them mattered. First, there was a new pill flooding the market. Blood-gathering pill, 3 times as strong as the usual stuff, 70% of the price, disciples all over the inner city snapping it up. Except the teacher took one look and knew what it was. Private medicine. Illegal. The blood tonics of this world were a monopoly, licensed and controlled by the big powers, and someone was making and selling this on a massive scale, right out in the open, which took the kind of nerve only the 5 great families had. The same families who'd been quietly recruiting soldiers and building a private army now big enough to rival the wounded commandant's county troops. The balance Kiu had held was tipping, and everyone could feel the ground moving. Don't let your disciples buy the cheap pills, they agreed. No good medicine is ever cheap for no reason. I'd already turned it down at the pharmacy for exactly that reason. Some instincts you trust. Second, and this one was pointed at us, the Kingland Gathering. A grand martial festival the 5 great schools threw every 3 years, half to trade techniques, half to show off and recruit. It was starting in 1 month, and there was a rumor going around that someone intended to make his name there by stepping on somebody older and weaker. Songfeng Hall, the feud school, had just taken in 10 new disciples and was sharpening every blade it had. And Zhao Yun, the one who crippled Zhao Ming, was 1 failed attempt away from crossing the 3rd wall. The old friends looked the teacher in the eye and told him plainly, "Be careful you don't become the stepping stone," and the teacher just picked up his cold tea and stared into the leaves and said nothing. I clocked all of it. A tournament in a month, a feud school hungry to make its bones, a stepping stone the whole county already expected to be my aging, declining, out-of-favor teacher. File it, sharpen for it. I had a month. I also got another offer around then, a nicer one. Madam Wu, the honorable loser from the dock, invited me to the fanciest restaurant in the inner city, apologized properly for the whole death match, and laid out a rare spirit fish worth 500 taels, a fish worth more than my entire house, as a gift. Then she made her pitch. Come work for the Wu family, name your price, and she'd fund my whole run at the military exam. And I'll be honest, that one tempted me, because the military exam was the only door to a sect and to the real high arts, and her money would have smoothed the whole road. But I was 1 step from the 3rd wall with my own 2 hands, and a road you walk on someone else's money is a road with a leash on it, and I'd come too far wearing no collar to buckle one on now. I ate her priceless fish, thanked her sincerely, and told her I'd think about it, which is the polite version of no. She wasn't even offended. She told her steward that what she admired wasn't my ranking or my fists, it was that I'd risked my life for the Cheng family when I didn't have to. Loyalty, she said, is the rarest thing worth buying. Smart woman. I filed her under ally maybe someday and went home, because I had a wall to break. While I was getting ready, the teacher was quietly getting his affairs in order, and it broke my heart a little to watch, because Zhu Lei knew he was dying. Not soon, maybe, but his blood was fading. He was a candle in the wind, and the head of Songfeng Hall was relentless and would never let this Kingland Gathering pass without trying to finish the feud. So the old man sat at his desk and wrote a letter to an escort agency he'd once served, arranging places for his disciples. Somewhere safe, somewhere they could make a living after he was gone and his enemies came calling. Fang Qiang, steady and experienced, could run escort teams. And me, he wrote, young but iron-hearted, a scholar, a major achievement fist, loyal to the bone, deserving of more help than a declining little school could ever have given him. He was ashamed, he told his wife. Ashamed that these students had followed him for years and gotten nothing but his old grudges to inherit. That hearing them call him master made him feel like a fraud. He sealed that letter with wax like it was the last honest thing he had to give, and he leaned back and closed his eyes, an old man lighting one final spark for the kids who'd trusted him. I didn't know about the letter yet, but I knew that look, and I want to be honest about Zhu Lei because it would be easy to paint him as the kindly old master and leave it there, and he was more complicated than that. He'd written me off as sand for months. He took Zhao Ming as his real heir and gave me the scraps. He kept me around mostly because a poor diligent kid is useful and cheap. But here is the thing that mattered, the thing that put him on the short list I keep in my chest instead of the one I keep in a book. When it counted, when he had real secrets, the force diagrams and the true teachings that most masters guard to the grave, he gave them to me. He didn't have to. I was nobody. And when the storm came for his school, his first thought wasn't to save himself. It was to sit at a desk and beg an old rival for jobs so his students would have somewhere to eat after he was gone. A man is what he does when the roof is coming down, and when Zhu Lei's roof came down, he spent his last strength trying to shelter the people under it. So I'd been quietly deciding for a while now that whatever happened at that gathering, my teacher, the man who handed a nobody the real secrets and never once asked for anything back, was not going to be anybody's stepping stone, not while I was standing in his yard. But first, the wall. That night in my own courtyard under the cold stars, I felt my blood do the thing it does right before everything changes. Long docile, heavy as lead, suddenly boiling like it had been thrown into hot oil. My counter clicked to the very last number. And I let go. I stopped holding a stance and just let my body move, and it moved wrong, or rather, it moved like nothing I'd ever done. Not the roaring, hard force of Bright, not the silent snake of Hidden. Something between existing and not, hard and soft, braided into one thing, flowing. My sleeves rustled with no wind. Every inch of me hummed, a fine crackling like distant thunder rolling under my skin, and then the last two gates, the crown of my head and the soles of my feet, the two hardest points, lit up like branding irons and blew open at once. One connecting me to the sky, one rooting me to the earth, and everything in between finally, completely, one single thing. I raised my arm, and a dead leaf drifting down in the cold wind came to rest above my shoulder. And it didn't land. And it didn't fall. It just hung there, half an inch off me, trembling, held up on nothing, unable to touch me and unable to leave. Not a feather can be added, not a fly can land. The third wall, transformation force. The realm that the 5 great families and the 2 big gangs treat as an honored guest, the level exactly one man in my whole school had ever reached. And he was my teacher, and he was dying. And here I was, standing in a courtyard on Champing Street with a leaf hovering over my shoulder, a fisherman's son who couldn't afford meat 2 years ago, now one of the top handful of fighters in the entire county, at an age where nobody sane should even dream of it. My whole body felt like tempered steel spun into silk, strong and soft at once, all of it under my will. Light and dark force gone, replaced by one pure thing that came straight from the thought. And I stood there in the dark, with my mother's warm porridge waiting on the stove, and I let myself smile just for a second at the sheer size of the guarantee I'd been handed and had cashed in one miserable rep at a time. I didn't tell anyone, obviously. I didn't tell the school, I didn't tell Yehua, I didn't tell my mother. I stayed home for days just feeling out my new body, deepening my organ armor, and I let the whole world keep believing exactly what it believed. That Lai Y was a hard-working C-list scholar with a decent fist and a weak foundation who'd topped out about where he was. Which is why, when I finally went back to the school and walked into a little sparring exhibition, I stayed sand. Wen Lai's golden boy son, Wen Shuo, a B-list scholar at the second wall, beat Fang Qiang and then swept the yard with his eyes, hunting for someone to impress the pretty medicine girl with. Some helpful junior brother pointed at me. I just waved him off. No thanks. The whole yard sagged with disappointment. There it was again, the story writing itself. Fang Qiang lost, so of course Lai Y's too scared to step up, wouldn't want to embarrass himself. When Shuo puffed up, and his teacher's disciples stood tall and smug, and everyone in that courtyard agreed on the shape of me, the careful C-lister who knew his place. I let them have it. I just held a leaf off my own shoulder with a realm most of them would die never reaching. Turning down a spar to protect that secret cost me nothing. It's the cheapest thing in the world to look small when you know exactly how big you are, and I had a very good reason to stay small for one more month. The Kinglin gathering was coming, and somebody was planning to make his name by stepping on my teacher. I intended to be the last step he ever took. I should have remembered that a courtyard full of people includes 2 old men who have spent their whole lives feeling for exactly the thing I was hiding. Because the second I waved off that spar, Wen Lai, the Mantis fist master, a transformation master himself, felt something in my blood that shouldn't have been there. And instead of asking about it politely, he tested it. One heartbeat he was sitting sipping tea. The next he was across the yard, no warning, fingers like blades screaming straight at my throat, a killing probe from a master that would have dropped anyone at the second wall. The whole yard turned to stone. Zhu Yu went white, Fang Qiang lunged and froze. And I, at the center of it, did the only thing my new body knew how to do. I didn't dodge, I didn't block, I just wasn't quite there. My upper body shifted a hair, water flowing around a rock, and his killing force slid past my neck and vanished into nothing, a clay ox sinking into the sea, all that power with nowhere to land. And a leaf kicked up by the wind of it drifted down and hung, half an inch off my shoulder, trembling, unable to touch me. Not a feather can be added, not a fly can land. Wen Lai's face split into a grin, and he came again harder. His whole life's Manti's fist folded into one mountain-splitting blow. And this time I met it. Hard force to hard force, and the stage cracked under both of us, and we each staggered back, and neither of us fell. He shook out his numb fingers, and he looked at me, and then he turned to my teacher and said the words that changed that yard forever. The younger generation is remarkable. Congratulations, old Zhu. Zhu Academy has a worthy successor. Transformation force, said out loud in front of everyone. I need you to understand the size of that word in that world, because it isn't like the other breakthroughs. Bright force gets you a job. Hidden force gets you respect. But a transformation master is a different category of being entirely. There was exactly one in that whole school, my teacher, an aging retired bodyguard, and even the 2 big gangs and the 5 great families treated a man like that as an honored guest and spent fortunes trying to buy his loyalty. A county the size of Jalen might hold a couple of dozen of them, most of them old, most of them famous, every one of them a pillar somebody's power leaned on. And here was a fisherman's son, barely out of his teens, medium-low bones, 3 months to reach the first wall 2 years ago, standing in a schoolyard with a dead leaf hanging off his shoulder and an old Manti's master calling him a worthy successor. You want to talk about a room breaking open. Fang Qiang stared at me like he'd never seen me. The new kids looked at me like I was something to worship. Jiang Ziu, who told the whole world I was a lucky fluke with no future, stood there with her hand over her mouth, watching her own bad judgment become a legend. Cao Yu couldn't get his jaw to close. And when Shuo, the golden son who'd swept the yard and puffed up for the pretty girl 5 minutes ago, went gray, because he'd just been strutting in front of a man who could have ended him without trying, and he knew it. But the one that got me was the teacher. Zhu Lei stood up, and his cloudy old eyes lit up like someone had poured 10 years back into them, and every bit of that gloom, the dying candle, the crippled disciple, the circling feud school, all of it lifted off his face at once. Because a school with one young transformation master in it is not a stepping stone. It's a school nobody dares to step on. I'd handed the dying old man the one thing that could keep his enemies awake at night, and I'd done it by accident, right when he needed it, and the joy on his face was worth every rep on every stake. He asked how I'd done it, and I looked him in the eye and told him it was luck, a coincidence. His precious medicine opened my last 2 gates, and I just sort of stumbled through the wall. Nobody stumbles through the 3rd wall. Everyone in that yard knew it was a ridiculous lie. And everyone let me tell it because that's the polite fiction you extend to a man strong enough to require one. Wen Lai's mouth twitched. He didn't believe a word. He also didn't push. That's how it works up here. The stronger you get, the more absurd a story people will nod along to. The teacher told me to consolidate, don't go picking fights, keep it quiet. And then he practically ran off to go tell his friend Gu the good news, walking lighter than I'd seen him walk in months. And overnight, the whole county rearranged itself around me, because a young transformation master is not a river patrolman. He's a treasure the 5 great families spend fortunes to court. The gifts started that same evening and didn't stop. My constable neighbor, the Changping Street shopkeepers, then the Han family and the Lai family from the Great 5. Their gift lists thick with blood pills and silver, all of them suddenly, urgently interested in being my dear friend. My mother sat in our courtyard cataloging silk and silver notes with a stunned look. This woman who a year ago was planning to weave nets all night to afford my rice, now writing down which powerful family sent what. And I wasn't really keeping track of who gave. I was keeping track of who didn't. That list is always the more useful one. Even Yihua's family sent 100 taels and called me a once-in-a-century talent, and I made sure that gift went in a different column in my heart than all the rest. The Cheng family gave when I was nobody. Everyone else gave now that I was somebody. I would never, ever forget which was which. Here's something I only pieced together much later, and it reframes this whole stretch, so I'll give it to you now. Captain Q wasn't dying. Q never got a fatal wound at all. The whole assassination was theater, a fake mortal injury kept up with poison that mimicked a dying man so that the vultures would relax and reach for the meat and show their hands. And they did. While the county thought the commandant was bleeding out in a tent, the 5 great families were flooding the market with illegal medicine and smuggling armor and crossbows, arming their private soldiers, buying gangs, bribing officials, and rigging the very exam that crippled Zhao Ming, all of them building a little kingdom inside the county with the sick commandant as their ladder. And Q lay in the dark with a map of Jalen in front of him, letting them get bolder, gathering every thread, waiting to pull. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that the ground felt like it was moving, and that a man who lies low instinctively steps off ground that's about to open. Remember the moving ground. It matters later in ways I couldn't see. For now, I had a debt to finish paying. I went by the cloth shop. First to the young master, Chen Kai, for a cup of tea and no real conversation, just to let a newly minted transformation master be seen at his door, which in this world is worth more than any words. As long as I'm breathing, my cousin will be looked after there. Some reminders don't need to be spoken. Then I went to see her. And it was the best hour of that whole cold winter. Lynn Manhua, manager now, in a clean vest with her hair pinned neat, doing accounts in a warm little side room instead of freezing in a dye tub. She lit up when she saw me, poked the brazier hotter, fussed that I must be cold, this woman who used to give me her dinner. She tried to thank me for the promotion, and I stopped her because it wasn't me, it was her, diligent and reliable, the Wang family just finally noticing. And we sat by the fire and remembered when we were kids. She told the story I'd half forgotten. She was little, she'd sneaked our grandfather's precious pipe to play with, and dented it against a millstone, and the old man went hunting the whole yard for the culprit with murder in his beard. And she hid behind the woodpile, terrified. And I, 8 or 9 years old, quiet little nothing that I was, walked up and said I'd done it. Took the beating. 2 feather dusters broken across me, and I never cried and I never gave her up, until my aunt spotted the millstone moss on her sleeve weeks later and figured it out anyway. She said I've always remembered that, why? And I said the only thing that was ever true about it. I couldn't just watch you get beaten. That was the whole of it at 8 and at 18. Same sentence, same girl. Turns out the man who could hold a leaf off his shoulder learned everything he needed to know about who to protect back when he couldn't even hold off a feather duster. Then I put a purse on the desk between us, more than 50 taels, and she shoved it back. No, she made her own money now, I needed it more. And I put my hand over the purse and over her hand and held them both down and told her the truth. You gave me your dowry when I had nothing. Now I have something. If you don't take this, I carry a stone in my chest. And she stopped fighting and gripped it, and her eyes went red, and she said, you've really made something of yourself. Debt paid, with interest. Exactly like I promised her on a rotting boat a lifetime ago, when the only bright thing in the world was the silver in her hand. I keep my promises, both kinds. The names in the little book and the names in my chest. This one was the sweetest to close. On the way home through the snow, I passed a third kind of ending. A hunched peddler in a patched coat, straw sandals soaked through, blue-toed, hauling baskets of needles and cheap rouge through a blizzard. He looked up, and it was Wen Tao, the richest of us once. The one who'd offered to hire me as his dog, who was going to be a clerk, the big man of Dumbay. He'd committed some crime, lost the post, had his property seized, and here he was, sunk lower than Reed Marsh, calling me Master Chen in a dry, cracked voice with a wall of ice between us where a friendship used to be. I didn't gloat, there was nothing to gloat about. I looked at the light gone out of his eyes, and I saw the whole truth of this world in one snowbound man. It grinds everyone. It ground Yuan Bo with a smile, and Mei Lin with a rich man's rules, and Deng Long with an empty wall, and now Wen Tao with a peddler's pole. The only reason it hadn't ground me was a line of gold in my skull I'd done nothing to earn. This was the boy, remember, who a year ago offered to hire me as his dog, who was going to be a clerk, the big man of Dumbay, so certain the world had a place for him near the top. And here he was in the snow, ruined, hauling needles and cheap rouge, calling the fisherman he'd pitied Master Chen with a wall of ice in his throat. So I put a few taels in his cracked, frozen hands and told him to buy his family winter clothes and firewood and get home before dark. And I walked on, and he bowed and cried and called me Master Chen into the snow. Fate is a cruel, careless hand. I just happened to be the one card it played face up. And then, a few days later, the storm the whole county had been holding its breath for finally arrived. The Kingland Gathering. It was held at the biggest arena in the county, Dianjiang Platform, deep in the inner city, and it was where the 5 great martial schools showed off their best every 3 years. Banners of every faction snapping in the cold wind, a crowd loud enough to drown thunder. My teacher walked me in through that huge stone gate like a man showing off a hidden sword he hadn't decided whether to draw. I got the full map of who really ran Jalen, all in one place. The witnesses at the gate, Chief Escort Gu Fan of the escort agency with an ugly old broadsword and eagle eyes, Yang Kang of the weapon shop with a businessman's warm smile and a killer's knuckles, both bowing and both weighing me the second I appeared. Inside, the real powers, the hall masters, Kaiyan Long of Tianju, big as a door, Wen Jinghong of Guangcheng, a white-bearded old man in faded gray who looked like nobody until you learned he'd once been named the #1 transformation master in the whole county. Fang Lihua of Hongyun, the one woman up there in bright red with long, strong legs and a straight spine. Zhu Han of Jinghong, resting with his eyes shut like the noise of the world was beneath him. My teacher had 2 friends up there with him, Wen Lai and Gu Changhai, 3 transformation masters standing together, and I clocked that even a dying old man is dangerous when he's got 2 like that at his shoulder. I memorized every face. When you're the smallest fish that just grew teeth, you learn the whole pond by heart or the pond eats you. And then the crowd parted and Song Feng Hall came in. Their master Luo King led them, and he was the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who smiles wider the more he hates you. He crossed the whole arena beaming, bowing, laughing like he and my teacher were old dear friends, congratulating Zhu Lei on his young prodigy, sounding so warm and sincere. And behind that smile for 1/2 second I caught the cold underneath, and I thought, there it is, a dog that bites doesn't bark. This was the man whose grudge had crippled Zhao Ming by proxy, the man the whole county expected to turn my teacher into a stepping stone today. And walking behind him, calm and careless, was Zhao Yun himself. The one who broke the golden boy's bones on the exam stage and left shoe prints on him. The whole of Zhu Academy went cold looking at that face. My teacher didn't play along with the smiling. He snorted, told Luo King to drop the act, his eyes burning at Zhao Yun. And Luo King, still smiling, dropped his one real line of the day, sweet as poison. I do hope Master Zhu's disciple isn't just a paper doll that crumbles at a touch. There it was, the challenge wrapped in a courtesy. Old Wen Jinghong, senior enough to referee gods, cut in and said the sensible thing. It's the Kingland Gathering. If you've got grudges, settle them on the stage. The stage, fine, I could work with a stage. My teacher sat us down and leaned in and gave me the whole of his wisdom in one sentence. Watch carefully, learn carefully, and survive by witnessing. He thought he was telling a young transformation master to keep his head down at a dangerous party. He didn't know he'd brought a hidden sword. And Luo King had just very politely asked me to draw it. For a while it was just fighters trading blows on the stage, and I watched and learned, which is what my teacher told me to do. Then Zhao Yun walked up to the ring, and he didn't announce his name to the crowd like everyone else. He looked straight at my teacher, and he said Song Feng Hall had come to seek guidance from Zhu Academy, and would anyone care to instruct him. It was a slap wearing a bow, right at my dying teacher's face in front of the whole county from the man who'd crippled his last disciple. Fang Qiang stood up before anyone could stop him, jaw tight, and went out to answer for the school, and Zhao Yun took him apart. 10 moves, that mountain-breaking hand, all concentrated penetrating force, cut through Fang Qiang's experience like it was paper, pierced his shoulder to the bone, and threw him off the stage bleeding. And I understood 2 things at once. One, Zhao Yun really was that good, a man who'd failed the 3rd wall and come back with a foundation harder than most people who'd passed it. 2, he had come here today to hurt my school on purpose in public for sport. Then Wen Shuo, the Golden Sun, went out to save face in front of Zhu Yu, and Zhao Yun broke his arm and threw him down next to Fang Qiang. 2 of the school's best wrecked in minutes. I sat there watching my kind, honest senior brother get carried off bleeding, the man who handed a starving nobody 2 warm buns on his first day, and I felt the yard's eyes start to slide toward the corner where I sat. Everyone knew what was coming. The whole point of Zhao Yun's performance was to force the school's last card out onto the table, the newly promoted master everyone had heard rumors about, so he could break me too and make his name 3 times over. My teacher's jaw was tight. Zhu Yu's face had gone white, and under my calm I felt something old and cold turn over, the same thing that woke up the day I watched Jin Hai smile over a beaten man in the mud. Somebody had walked into my teacher's yard in front of the whole county and started breaking the people I owed. There is a very short list of things I will step out of the shadows for. That is at the top of it. And then Zhao Yun stood in the center of the ring, looked past all of them, straight at me sitting quiet behind my teacher, and said the name. I hear you've got a newly promoted transformation, master. Why was it? If none of the rest of them can do it, you come up here. The whole plan was written on Luo King's face. Use a fresh, clumsy transformation master as a whetstone to make Zhao Yun's name, and if it went wrong, the escort Gu Fan was sitting right there, primed to leap in and save Zhao Yun before I could finish anything. Win or lose, Zhao Yun got famous. It was, honestly, a smart setup. I stood up. I brushed dust off clothes that had no dust on them, and I walked out onto that stage as calm as a man going to fetch water because I had spent 2 years learning exactly how to look like less than I was, and I was about to spend about 4 seconds unlearning it. Zhao Yun came at me like a mad tiger, his whole life's best punch, palms red as branding irons, a strike that would shatter the organs of a dark force master. And I didn't take a stance. I raised one arm, spread my fingers a little, the most basic move in the whole art, the one you learn on day 1. The monkey asks for directions, lazy as brushing crumbs off a table. I've always wished I could have climbed inside Zhao Yun's head for the half-second right then, because I know exactly the story he was telling himself. He'd failed the 3rd wall once and come back harder. He was the pride of a feud school. He just folded 2 men in front of the whole county. His blood was singing at its peak. And here was some jumped-up fisherman too arrogant to even guard himself, waving a beginner's move like a fan. He thought he was about to shatter that lazy little palm and the arm behind it, and the whole legend of Zhu Academy in one glorious strike, with everyone watching, and walk off the biggest name in Jalen. I know he thought that because it's written on the face of every single man I've ever let underestimate me in the exact instant before the floor drops out from under him. He was delighted. He thought I was arrogant. He drove his mountain into my palm, and his mountain broke on me like rotten wood on tempered steel. Force to force, and mine was purer, and his best blow just came apart. He went flying backward, wide open, spent exactly the way Fang Qiang had flown a minute ago, exactly the way Zhao Ming had flown off the exam stage months ago. And I slid forward half a step, quiet as a shadow, and I did to Zhao Yun precisely what Zhao Yun had done to my rival. I put my fingers into his spine. The escort Gu Fan was fast. He'd been coiled the whole time, ready to save the golden boy. He shattered the stone under his own feet, launching to stop me, hand out for my shoulder. He was fast. I was faster. The crack of it went through that silent arena like dry branches breaking, and everyone felt it in their own backs, and Zhao Yun came down on the stone, twisted and twitching, and finished, spine broken, the same ruin he'd handed Zhao Ming, delivered back to him in one exchange. Gu Fan landed at the ring's edge with his hand frozen in empty air, and his face gone gray, because he'd just learned that a newly promoted master's killing intent moves faster than an old master's reflexes, when the newly promoted master has been planning the kill since he walked through the gate. I drew my fingers back like I was brushing off a speck of dust. I didn't look at Zhao Yun. I looked at Luo King, whose warm smile had shattered into pure rage, and at Gu Fan with his frozen hand, and I said it flat, the exact words this world had taught me. Fists and kicks have no eyes. In a sparring match, life and death are left to fate. Isn't that right, Chief Escort Wu? The whole platform went cold to the bone. That's the thing about the rules of this world. They cut both ways. They'd been using them to grind people like me for years. It just turned out I'd read the fine print, too. That was for Zhao Ming, by the way. A name I'd written in my little book and never crossed off because the world crippled him before I could. His enemy I could reach, so I did. Not out of love for Zhao Ming, who'd have made me his dog if he could, out of something colder and simpler. Nobody carves up my teacher's school in front of me and walks off whole. Nobody. Luo King couldn't accuse me of anything because I'd say exactly what everyone said. The strength got away from me. I was only defending myself, and it would stick because it always sticks for the strong. So he did the only thing left. He sent his best. His chief disciple, Jiang Wei, a transformation master of 2 years standing, a quiet, plain, unremarkable-looking man who moved like a stone that had been polished smooth at the bottom of the sea, and who was, everyone in that arena understood, a great deal more dangerous than Zhao Yun had ever been. This one I couldn't end in one move. This one was a real fight. Jiang Wei didn't posture. He just lowered his weight a little, let his hands hang, and breathed, and then he was across 3 zhang of stone with a hand on my chest before the sound of him moving reached me. No wind, no roar, just a silent, penetrating force aimed straight at my organs. If I'd been the clumsy, fresh transformation master everyone assumed I was, that one touch ends it. I wasn't. I turned his wrist off its line, a whip hand to the pulse, and most of his killing force slid away, and I gave him a little wound to remember me by. But he was good, he was greased. He shed most of my counter, too, and enough of his palm got through that my chest lit up and I slid back half a step, swallowing blood. First exchange. Even. And every master in the stand sat up, because they could all read the door even if the crowd only saw the show, and the door said this plain fisherman was matching a 2-year transformation master move for move. Then it turned into a war. He came like a tsunami, palms hard as axes cratering the stone where I'd stood, and I flowed through it, ape leaping the ravine, hunting his joints and pulse points with the fast, crisp finger strikes that Tongbei does better than anything, forcing him to defend instead of unload. Back and forth, force meeting slither, the whole stage breaking apart under us and neither of us giving. And I want to be straight with you because I've told you a lot of fights where I made it look easy, and this one wasn't. Jiang Wei had 2 years on that realm and I had 2 weeks, and it showed. His control was smoother than mine, his experience deeper, and twice he read a move before I finished it and made me pay a little for it. Up in the stands, the old masters weren't watching a show anymore. They were watching a door, the way real experts do, and I could feel them all leaning in, doing the same math I was doing. And their math said the fresh boy runs out of road first. For about 30 exchanges, their math was right. He was pressing me inch by inch, and I was spending things I couldn't get back, and somewhere in there a cold little voice in my head said, "This is the man who could actually kill you tonight, so stop performing and start winning." He got frustrated, and frustration in a master is a gift. He opened up his true killing move, one he'd never wasted on a spar in his life, a hard palm splitting down at my skull and a soft one snaking at my ribs, the whole space around me sealed, no dodge left. My teacher shot to his feet. Zhu Yu went white. Everyone who knew what they were watching thought I was about to get crippled. So I didn't dodge. I planted and I sucked my chest in and let toad-fishing energy hum through my organs, all that leather I'd built quietly at home for exactly this, and I met his mountain with my own, the mountain collapse, pure fist, all my transformation force and all my organ armor behind it. We hit like 2 boulders. The stone under us didn't survive it. My blood roared and my armor ate the worst of the shock. But his hands had slapped a red-hot steel pillar, and the recoil went up his arms and into his organs, and turned his face white, then red, then a bad shade of blue, and he stumbled back 4 steps with something shifted inside him. And in that half-beat where his old force was spent and his new force hadn't come, the half-beat that decides every fight up here, I was already moving faster than he could retreat. 1 clean strike to the chest, everything behind it, and Jiang Wei left the stage backward through the air and didn't come back up. Silence, the kind you could hear your own heart in. Songfeng Hall's chief disciple, a 2-year transformation master, one of the true pillars of the feud school, carried off unconscious, fate unknown, by a fisherman who couldn't afford meat 2 years ago. In one afternoon, Luo King lost both his heirs, the failed and hardened one and the polished old one, and the man who was supposed to turn my teacher into a stepping stone stood over his broken disciples with red eyes and no words, screaming for a doctor. My teacher, when the hall master Zhu Han quietly told him he'd raised a fine student, said it was 5 parts skill and 5 parts luck, and I loved him for the lie. And I sat back down and closed my eyes and breathed, and I let the whole county rearrange its opinion of me one more time. The grain of sand, the second Deng Long, the lucky C-lister, terror of the Kinglin gathering. Funny how the story keeps getting rewritten by the exact same people who were so sure of the last version. But the day wasn't really about the fighting was the distraction. The real move came at dusk, and it came smiling. The two witnesses, the escort Gu Fan and the weapon shop boss Yang Kang, stood up and gave a lovely speech about hard times and river bandits, and how the county's little factions were all scattered and weak and vulnerable. And then they proposed a solution. A Jalen Chamber of Commerce. Pool everyone's resources, coordinate all the trade and security, share the cheap medicine and the fine weapons, all under one roof. Backed, they mentioned lightly, by the Zhu and Huang families. And I sat there and felt the whole shape of it, and it was the same shape as everything else in this world, just bigger. It wasn't an alliance. It was a swallowing, wearing the word cooperation. The Zhu and Huang families had spent months arming private soldiers and flooding illegal medicine and buying officials. And now, with the commandant supposedly dying, they were going to fold every gang and school and escort agency in the county into one net they held the strings of. The little schools, desperate and broke, started saying yes, one after another. Guangcheng, Tianzhu, then even the big ones, Jinghong and Hongyun, each yes made the next holdout look more alone. My teacher stalled, said it was a big decision, he'd have to talk it over. Gu and Guo stalled too, because we could all feel that this wasn't a chamber of commerce. It was the ground moving. The same ground I'd stepped off of by instinct weeks before. The great families were closing their fist on the whole county, and every single soul in that arena was about to be inside it or crushed by it. You have to understand what a thing like that does to a place like Jalen, because I'd been reading it from the bottom for 2 years. A county isn't really run by the magistrate, whatever the paper says. It's run by whoever controls the meat, the medicine, the docks, the roads, and the men strong enough to hurt you. For a long time, the commandant had held all those threads loosely against the 5 great families. And in the gap between them, the little people breathed. The schools, the escort agencies, the fishermen, even the gangs. Everyone fed on the crumbs of a balance nobody loved, but everyone survived on. Now one side had decided the balance was over. Arm your own soldiers, poison the medicine supply, buy the officials, wait for the strong man to die and swallow the whole board. And the terrible genius of it was that it wore a smile and offered to help. Cheap medicine, guaranteed work, safety in numbers. Half the county said yes with tears of gratitude, walking into the mouth thanking the teeth. I'd survived the whole way up by feeling exactly this kind of shift a beat before other people did, the way a fish feels the net before it sees it. And every animal instinct I owned was screaming the same thing it had screamed the day I met Jin Hai. Get off this ground. It's about to open. I just didn't know yet how or when, or that the strongest man in the county was already lying in a tent pretending to bleed, holding the string that would drop the whole trapdoor. I only knew that the age of the small, quiet fisherman was ending, one way or another, and I had better be very strong and very fast before it did. And that was the day I stopped being a hidden fisherman. Afterward, in his study, my teacher told me 2 things. The first was a warning. Luo King was a vengeful man and a transformation master at major achievement, a full tier above me, and he would never let this go. Keep your head down, watch every shadow. I nodded like a good boy. I'd already done the math on Luo King, and my math had a different ending than his. The second was a door. He told me what was above transformation force, a thing called Bayodan strength, and his eyes went hungry describing it. It's where you stop tempering just flesh and start growing an actual something, a mysterious kai, and with it you can hurt a man with a tossed flower, walk on water light as a swallow, heal your own wounds, remake your own body, and stretch your years. Martial arts, he said, is a killing art, but push it far enough and you stop being just a man who kills. To reach it, you need 2 things almost nobody can get. 1, a single martial art honed to its absolute limit until it grows a seed of true essence inside you, a fire seed. 2, a secret mind cultivation technique to light that seed and steer it, or the seed just fizzles, or worse, ignites and blows your meridians apart and kills you. And those techniques are the crown jewels of the great sects, guarded like the family blood. He'd spent 7 years in the outer school of something called the Heisha sect and never once touched the real thing. So there was my whole road laid out in one conversation. Perfect the art, ignite the seed, pass the military exam, get into a sect, earn the mind cultivation technique, and climb toward a realm that stretches a life and hurts men with flowers. A fisherman who ate reflection porridge 2 years ago aiming at immortality. Sure. Why not? The gold in my skull had never once told me the ceiling. It only ever said, keep going, it works. Meanwhile, down at ground level, the great families made their move, and it was quieter and smarter than any punch. They called it the Jalen Chamber of Commerce, that thing the escort and the weapon boss proposed at the gathering, backed by the Zhu and Huang families. And within weeks it had swallowed most of the county's business, and then it turned its jaws on the martial schools. Every guard job, every temp post, every little bit of work the poor disciples used to survive on, all of it just vanished, coordinated away, redirected to schools that had joined the chamber. They cut off 60% of the livelihood of every academy that stayed independent. They weren't going to fight my teacher's school. They were going to starve it. Disciples started drifting away, even good ones, because you can't eat loyalty and blood pills cost money. The empty yard got emptier. A promising kid named Lin Hao came to me, ashamed, said he'd finally reached the first wall and there wasn't a single job left to be found. His family was in debt for his training. I didn't try to stop him. I just told him to keep training wherever he landed. He wouldn't be the last to go. And my teacher, Wen Lai, and Gu figured out what the chamber actually was. Not a chamber of commerce. A smuggling ring wearing one. All that coordinated river and land transport was moving the illegal blood, gathering pill and something nastier, a bone-corroding poison, out to the whole county under a legitimate-looking flag. Join it, and the day it all came crashing down, you'd be the ready-made scapegoat. It wasn't a chamber. It was a death warrant with a welcome mat. The three old men swore to stand together and stay out of it, even if staying out of it starved them. In the middle of all that, I went back to Dumb Bay for the Dragon King Temple, and I saw what this world does to the ones without a gold guarantee in their skulls. Wen Tao was working the donation table now, hawking blessings for coins. I dropped 10 taels in his bag, more silver than most of those fishermen see in a year, and the whole crowd gasped, and Wen Tao bowed so low his waist nearly touched the mud. Then Mei Lin came over with her new husband, a laborer named Ding Wai, and when she raised her hand to fix her hair, her sleeve slipped and showed me a fresh bruise on her wrist. And her husband stood there fawning and scraping and elbowing her hard enough to make her stagger, calling her clumsy, asking me for work. I looked at that bruise and I looked at him, and I said it very quietly. Strength is a fine thing when it's used to feed your family and shelter them. Used wrong, on the hand that feeds you or the wall that keeps out the wind, it becomes the source of all your troubles. That's all I said. And Ding Wai went white and started shaking and swearing he'd never let Mei Lin suffer a day, because a transformation master had just, very calmly, explained to him what happens to men who hit people I grew up with. Mei Lin looked up at me, and there was real gratitude in it, and I hated that this was the only kind of help I could give her. A threat wrapped around a stranger, but in this world a threat from someone strong is worth more than all the pity in the world. I thought about that a lot walking back through the snow. When I was a boy in the reeds, weak and small and always afraid, I used to think that if I ever got strong, I'd fix things. Save people. Make the world a little less cruel. And now I was one of the strongest men in the whole county, and here was what my strength actually bought a girl I'd grown up with. Not rescue. Not a better life. Just one frightened husband for a while, deciding it was safer not to hit her because a scary man had noticed. That's the whole grim truth of power in a place like this. It doesn't make the world kind. It just lets you put your thumb on one small corner of it and hold that corner still for the people you love for as long as you're watching. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's the difference between a bruise and a broken life, and I had been on the wrong side of that difference too long to pretend it was nothing. You and Bo, they told me, got let go by the loan sharks once they learned he knew me, then vanished. Ding Fan vanished years ago. The kids who sat in the reeds with me planning how to survive were scattered to the wind, ground down or gone, and the temple that used to hold a dozen of us now felt emptier than ever. Same reeds, same cold. All those faces gone. I stood in the snow and let it be sad because it was, and then I walked home to the one thing this world hadn't taken from me. My mother and a warm stove and time to get stronger. Because getting stronger was about to matter more than ever. The teacher, seeing the storm coming, started getting his people to safety. He arranged to send his daughter Zhu Yu away to that same Heisha sect, through an uncle who was a deacon there, a man he'd feuded with for years and now swallowed his pride to beg, because a sect is a fortress and Jalen was about to become a battlefield. And here's a thing he floated, gently, that I'll be honest about. He wondered aloud whether I might marry Zhu Yu and go with her. It was, on paper, perfect. She'd have a protector, I'd get into a sect through the marriage, the two people he trusted most would look after each other. He wasn't wrong that it was the smartest road he could draw for either of us. There was just one problem, and it wasn't mine. It was hers. Yu thought of me as a reliable junior brother, steady as a mountain and precisely 0% as a man who made her heart race. And I'll tell you something that surprised me a little. That was fine. I didn't feel the racing thing either. I respected her. I'd have protected her out of respect for the teacher alone, but my foundation wasn't set and my heart wasn't in it, and I've never once in this life tried to build something real on a convenient lie. The teacher saw it in both our faces and let it drop, said matters of the heart can't be forced, and he was right. Some doors you don't walk through just because they're open. She'd go to the sect. I'd find my own road there. That was cleaner for everyone, and cleaner is usually kinder. He offered me the safe road too, a steady job at an escort agency in another county, alongside Fang Qiang. Fang Qiang took it gratefully with real tears because it was a lifeline and he knew he'd never reach the third wall, and a stable wage was everything now. I deferred. An escort agency is safe, but it's a dead end, no internal arts, no sect, no ceiling worth climbing. Time was the thing I needed, not shelter, room to grow. And then the Huang family sent their heir to buy me, and accidentally told me exactly who I needed to kill. Huang Mingxuan, the next head of the family, invited me to tea with a transformation master bodyguard at his shoulder, and he made 3 offers. 1, an apology for his aunt Guo Meilin, delivered by offering to punish, exile, or imprison her at my word, discussing a blood relative like a chair he could throw out, which told me everything about how the Huang family treats people. 2, a fortune to leave my school and join them, 1,000 taels, a mansion in the prefecture, pills, secret manuals, anything I wanted. And 3, the poisoned one, wrapped as a kindness. Join us, and my father will personally smooth over your feud with Luo King, because Luo King lost a treasured disciple to you, and in Huang Mingxuan's careful words, that hatred is hard to forget. Hatred is hard to forget. There it was. The polite young man in the moon-white robe had just courteously informed me that Luo King wanted me dead, and was offering to sell me protection from a threat his own family was standing behind. I smiled and said I'd think it over, and I watched him sigh when I left and mutter that good advice is wasted on a dead man. Fine. Everybody in this room had now told me the same thing in 3 different tones. Luo King is coming for you, which meant I needed to get there first. It's the only rule of mine that's never once let me down. When a man decides to kill you, you do not wait politely for the appointment. You strike before he does. So I went home, and I finished the last piece I'd been building for exactly this. That night I pushed toad fishing energy into its 3rd and final stage, and it was the worst and best thing I've ever put my body through. The thunder didn't come from outside this time. It came from inside my own bones, a roar that shook me nearly off the bed, marrow burning and remaking itself. And out of my skin came years of caked poison and impurity, all the cheap medicine and old damage and swamp of this hard life. It squeezed out in a black stinking sweat until I looked like I'd been dragged through a sewer. And underneath the filth, everything changed. Marrow like silver frost, blood heavy as mercury. Organs like iron, a body finally, completely, scrubbed clean and forged hard. I opened my eyes and breathed out, and the breath shot 3 feet across the room like an arrow. Tongbei fist perfected, toad fishing energy at its 3rd realm, my organs armored, my marrow reforged. I ran the numbers one more time, cold and clear. Against Luo King, a major achievement transformation master, the man who wanted me dead. 100%. I closed my 5 fingers slowly and felt the whole of it answer. Somewhere across the county, an old man was polishing a grudge, planning to take his time, sure he held the higher ground. He didn't know the fisherman had just finished sharpening. As it happened, Luo King had picked that very night to kill me. He'd gathered 2 more transformation masters, a Blood River gang boss and a Zhu family blade, over wine and a warm fire, and paid them in shops and rare medicine and set the time. Tonight, the hour of the ox, they'd surround Zhu Academy, one of them for my dying teacher, the rest for me. He walked home alone through the blizzard, savoring it, the grudge finally about to be fed. He should have taken a carriage. He should not have walked into a narrow, black, empty back alley, alone in a snowstorm with a man like me in the world. Because I was already in the shadows of that alley, and I came out of them with no warning and no words, just the purest killing intent I owned, a fist heavy as a falling mountain into his unguarded ribs. Even ambushed, he was a major achievement master, 40 years of surviving in his reflexes, and he got an elbow in the way. It didn't save him. It just changed which bone broke first. He crashed into the wall with his left arm ruined and his ears ringing, and finally looked up and saw the young man in dark clothes blocking his way out. He knew the Tongbei stance the second I raised my hand. "Lie why?" he spat. "Treacherous little beast, no martial ethics, hiding in the dark like a rat." And I told him the truth of it, calm as the snow. "Master Luo, the road to the underworld is long. I came to see you off." Then we fought, and I want to be clear about what that fight was. He was a tier above me on paper. He'd killed men for decades. His mountain-breaking hand cratered the walls of that alley a foot deep where my head had been. On paper, I should have lost. But I'd read his grammar, and I had toad-fishing energy humming through organs like iron, marrow like silver frost, a body I'd spent months scrubbing clean and forging hard in a dark courtyard for exactly this appointment. His killing blows slid off me or got eaten by my armor. My finger strikes cut his power off at the wrist and shaved it down blow by blow. Every exchange, he spent his 40 years and I spent my 2. Every exchange, the gap closed, because his best landed on leather and steel, and mine landed on an old man with a broken arm. I'll give you the shape of it because it was the closest fight of my life, and I earned every second. He recovered fast from that first ambush, faster than any man his age had a right to, and he stopped raging and went cold and careful, which is when a master is truly dangerous. He came low and high at once, a leg sweeping for my ankles like a steel whip, a claw hooking for my eyes, the whole alley sealed so there was nowhere to step. On paper, that combination cripples me. But I didn't step back. I stepped in, right down his center where he didn't expect a smaller man to go, and drove a knee into his gut while his claw tore nothing but the air where my face had been. He grunted, and for the first time in the fight, his eyes changed. Because I was supposed to be a clumsy, fresh transformation master, and clumsy, fresh masters do not walk through a major achievement killing move to knee you in the belly. He threw everything after that. He was a transformation master at the top of his tier, and when a man like that decides it's his life or yours, the air itself starts breaking. He drove me back, cratering walls, and one blow got through and slammed my chest, and I felt my ribs answer, and any normal man ends there. But that's the whole thing about the months I'd spent alone in a dark courtyard swallowing breath until my organs turned to leather. His killing blow hit that leather and stopped. He looked at me still standing, and I watched 40 years of certainty crack down the middle, watched a man who had never once in his life met something he couldn't break realize, too late, in a snowy alley, that tonight was the night he finally had. I baited him. Left him an opening that looked real, and his experience saw it and his experience took it, and that was the mistake. His last desperate punch whistled past my chest and buried itself in the wall, and it left him wide open, spent off balance, exactly the half-beat this world decides everything in. And I put everything I had, all my counters, all my armor, all 2 years of a fisherman becoming a weapon, into one plain, unadorned punch. Luo King didn't get up from it. The man who came to feed his grudge tonight ended up in the snow instead, and the grudge went hungry forever. I searched him, took 500 tales and a thin book, and then I heard footsteps at the alley mouth, fast, many, and I went up the wall and onto the roofs and vanished into the snow the way I always do. And a heartbeat after I was gone, an armored figure stepped into that alley and looked down at the dead master, and it was Captain Qiu Tianbao who was supposed to be dying in a tent. He wasn't dying. He'd never been dying. I was running the rooftops when a black iron spear came out of the snow like a falling star and buried itself in the stone 3 steps ahead of me, humming, and I turned and there he was, Qiu Tianbao, tall and whole and not remotely dying, walking through the blizzard like he owned the weather. The most powerful man in the county, the one everyone thought was bleeding out in a tent, standing in front of me with his cloak snapping in the wind. He told me Luo King was dead in the alley behind me, killed savagely, someone seen moving very fast. And he watched my face while he said it. And here, standing on a snowy rooftop in front of the single most powerful man in the county, with a fresh corpse cooling in the alley behind me, was the ultimate test of the only skill I'd been perfecting since the day I strangled Jin Hai. Not the fist, the face. The ability to be exactly as small as the moment required. So I gave him the performance of my life. Wide eyes, honest confusion, a young man wrongly suspected. Master Luo dead. Are you accusing me, sir? I just finished training, heard fighting, hid in a safe spot like a sensible person. Kill Luo King? A major achievement master when I've barely touched the transformation realm? How could I possibly? I don't have the ability. I was clear-eyed and earnest and nervous in exactly the right proportions. The fisherman's son bewilderment I'd been practicing for 2 years. 2 years of letting rivals believe I was sand, of taking a loss to an armpit, of calling a transformation breakthrough dumb luck. Every single one of those small lies had been rehearsal for this one conversation, with a man who could have turned me to paste with the spear he'd already thrown, and who was watching my face the way an eagle watches a field. Q looked at me for a long moment, and then he laughed, soft and cold, and let it go. Luo King colluded with traitors, sold poison and armor, deserved to die. His death saved us trouble. He didn't believe my story for a second. He also didn't care because the man I'd killed was on his own list, and I'd just crossed a name off it for him for free. Your talent may be average, he said, but this heart of yours is rare. A pity you're stuck in a place as small as Jalen. And then casually, like tossing a coin, have you ever thought about joining the Wudai sect? Think it over. Jalen's game is nearly finished, and he turned and walked back into the storm. I stood on that roof and finally understood the whole board. The assassination was a lie. Q's fatal wound was theater. He'd played dead for months to make the vultures reach for the meat and show their hands, and tonight was the night he closed his fist. Killing Luo King, I hadn't stumbled into a private feud. I'd stepped onto the very edge of a war a Wudai deacon had been quietly winning the whole time, and pulled one thorn out ahead of him. Because across the inner city, the sky was on fire. Columns of smoke and flame tearing up through the snow, right out of the heart of the safest, richest, most untouchable district in the county, the fortress of the great families. Steel on steel, screams, war drums, all of it pouring out of the Huang and Zhu mansions and Ren pharmacy and the escort agency. Q's soldiers, black-armored, crossbows in ranks, kicking in the iron gates of families who thought they were about to own the whole county. The Huang patriarch's transformation master bodyguard, the one who'd helped stage the fake assassination months ago, died on the end of Q's spear with the truth finally dawning on his face. The Huang head laughed like a madman and admitted defeat. The Zhu family, the pharmacy, the smuggling hub, the gang, all of it crushed in one lightning night. Every crate of illegal pills and poison and crossbow dragged out into the torchlight as evidence. The Jalen Chamber of Commerce, that behemoth that had been starving my teacher's school for weeks, collapsed before dawn like a tent with its pole pulled. The 5 great families spent months building a little kingdom on top of a dying commandant. The commandant was never dying. They'd built their kingdom on a trapdoor, and he'd just pulled the lever. I slipped home over the rooftops into my dark courtyard, past my sleeping mother, and bolted my door, and I took out the thin book I'd pulled off Luo King. I'd expected his fist manual. It wasn't. It was called the 8 Extremes Vajra Body, and it was a superior hard art, the real kind, the kind that turns a body into something closer to iron than flesh, 8 whole realms of it. Ordinary hard arts are a poor man's dead end. They wreck your organs and kill you young and never grow you any real power. But a superior one, mastered, stands with the best a sect can teach. It has exactly 2 problems. It takes inhuman perseverance to grind through, and it needs a fortune in medicine to survive each stage. Which are, of course, not problems at all for a man with a gold guarantee in his skull and a dead master's 500 taels in his hand. I also finally understood something. My toad fishing energy, the organ armor art off Wu Yang, had only ever had 3 realms. It always felt unfinished, and now I knew why. It was half a book. Someday I'd complete it. For now I had a superior external art to pair with my internal one, iron on the outside and mercury within, and I lay in the dark doing the math on exactly how monstrous a body I could build with both. The counter for the Vajra body lit up on the very first read, and the first realm looked like a month's work, because my realm was already so high the whole thing came cheap. Let me spell out what that meant, because this is where I let myself get genuinely greedy. Everybody in this world picks a lane. You go internal, you nourish your energy and your organs, you get subtle and deadly and you live a little longer, but your outside stays flesh. Or you go external, you forge your skin and bones into something like armor, but the hard arts wreck your insides and kill you young and never grow you real power. 2 roads and you pick one, because doing both means twice the medicine, twice the suffering, twice the decades, and nobody has the time or the coin or the will to walk both all the way up. Nobody except a man whose counter never misses and who keeps finding fortunes on the bodies of the people who came to kill him. I had a superior internal art wrapping my organs in leather and mercury, and now I had a superior external art to plate the outside in something closer to iron than skin. Run them together, and the external art's fatal flaw that it rots your insides gets healed by the internal art nourishing them. And the internal art's flaw that your outside stays soft gets plated over by the external one. They don't just add up, they cover each other's throats. I lay there on my bed in a dark courtyard and understood that I was about to build the one thing this world had decided couldn't exist. A body forged on both roads at once, iron without and mercury within. And the only reason it was possible was a line of gold in my skull that turned everyone else's impossible gamble into my guaranteed grind. I did not sleep much that night. I was too busy being delighted. 2 years ago, I fell off a wooden stake in 3 breaths. That night, I fell asleep planning to forge myself into something the word human doesn't quite cover. The gold in my skull had never once mentioned there was a ceiling. I was beginning to suspect it because there wasn't one. By morning, the whole county knew. The great families were rubble, the chamber was ash, and everyone suddenly remembered they'd always known the commandant was faking. My teacher, gray with worry, locked the school down and told everyone to keep their mouths shut and their doors closed, because in the wreckage of a thing that big, a careless word could get you buried with it. And then a captain's personal guard walked into Zhu Academy, bowed to me in front of the whole stunned yard, and said the commandant requested the honor of my presence. My teacher's jaw nearly hit the ground. The grain of sand, the lucky C-lister, a distinguished guest of the man who'd just broken the 5 great families in a single night. They walked me through the military camp, and it was a graveyard of the mighty. Ruined lords and their families huddled in the cold like stray dogs, guards who used to swagger now kneeling in the mud. And there on her knees, hair wild, her fine brocade caked in filth, her carefully kept face gone to pure terror, was Madame Guo Malin, the woman who'd offered to make me her dog, the one who called me a mudfish who'd stay a mudfish and never be a king, who swore I'd regret refusing her. She looked up and saw me walk past, calm, clean, led by the commandant's own guard as an honored guest, and something in her face just broke. Do you remember what she said to me back at the exam when I turned down her offer to be her household dog? A mudfish in a wild river is still just a mudfish. It will never be a king. There will come a day when it regrets this. She'd said it like a curse, so sure of the shape of the world, so sure of the shape of me. And here was the day she'd promised, arrived right on schedule, except the mudfish was the one walking free through the wreckage, and the great lady of the Huang house was the one kneeling in the freezing mud with her hair torn down, watching her whole prophecy land on her own head. There's your king, madam. There's your regret. It's just standing on the other side of the fence than you planned. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. The moment did all the gloating a man could ever need. Guo Jing knelt beside her, and I stopped, and I told the guard I knew the girl. Check her, and if there's nothing, let her go. One word. That's what my word was worth now. I couldn't save Guo Jing from the whole cruel machine of her life, but I could pull her out of this particular fire, because she'd once been a scared kid in the reeds picking water chestnuts with me, and I don't forget the reeds. Then they brought me to Q, in a hall stacked with the confiscated fortune of an entire fallen empire, and he got to the point. He offered me the sky, the Wudai sect, not the slow road, 3 years grinding in the outer school hoping some elder notices you. The other road. He drew an antique envelope out of his sleeve, a letter of recommendation, and slid it across the table. It meant I could skip straight to the inner court. Straight to the superior mind cultivation technique, the thing my dying teacher spent 7 years and never touched. The torch that lights the fire seed, the first real step on a road to a realm that hurts men with flowers and stretches a life past its natural end. Madame Wu had mentioned me to him twice, it turned out. Her generous gift wasn't fish. It was a boat and a road and a word in the right ear. The whole thing was arranged. 3 days. North by water from Nanyang Temple Pier, on the Wu family's own boats, all the way to the capital and the gate of the sect. A fisherman's son who ate porridge thin enough to see his own hungry face in it, holding a ticket to the closest thing this world has to heaven. Let me tell you what that letter actually was, so you feel the weight of it in your hand the way I did. Everything I'd done in Jalen, every wall, every kill, every fortune off a dead man's body, all of it had been climbing inside a box. Jalen County was the whole board I'd been playing on, and I'd won it. And the prize for winning a place like Jalen is that you finally see how small Jalen is. Above the county, there are prefectures. Above the prefectures, there are the great sects, the states within the state, where men cultivate a kai that heals wounds and stretches lifespans and does things my dying teacher could only describe like a legend he half believed. My teacher spent 7 years scrubbing at the outer gate of one of those sects and never got past it. Most men who reach the inner court do it by grinding 3 years in the outer school and praying an elder happens to look their way, a lottery on top of a lottery. And this letter, this single antique envelope, skipped all of it. It walked me straight through the gate my teacher died outside of, into the room where they teach the real thing, the mind cultivation art that lights the fire seed, the first rung of a ladder whose top I still can't see. I thought about the boy on the rotting boat chewing rice bran who announced he'd learned martial arts and got laughed off a wrecked ship in a marsh. And I thought quietly, so this is where that boy ends up. Then I reached for the letter. But not quite yet. I took the letter. Of course I took the letter. But before I did, I asked the commandant of Jalen County for one thing, and it wasn't silver, and it wasn't medicine, and it wasn't a title. My father, I said, Lai Kang. 3 years ago they took him to dig a canal, and we never heard from him again. Could you find out if he's alive? Q went quiet and said maybe it was the 1,000-men canal, and he'd try, no promises. And that's the whole shape of it if you want it in 2 lines. I started this life as a starving orphan on a rotting boat, in a bay owned by a smiling man with a knife scar, with a father dragged off to die, and a cheat code I hadn't earned humming in my skull. And I'm ending this part of it as a transformation master, an honored guest of the man who rules the county, holding a golden road to a great sect, with the powerful people who scorned me kneeling in the mud, and finally, for the first time, the strength to go looking for my father. I don't say the words I used to say back then. Back on the boat, my 3 rules were don't start trouble, don't fear it, and if it comes, run. I don't run anymore. Turns out the whole time I was learning to be the thing everyone else runs from. Ask me if I regret a single name in that little book, a single rep on that stake, a single night I broke my own rule and walked in the dark. Go ahead. Ask me. The boat leaves in 3 days. North by water, out of the only county I've ever known in this life, toward a capital and a sect I never dared dream of. And somewhere out there, maybe at the bottom of a canal or the far end of a hard road, is a man who was dragged away for being honest and never got to see what his quiet, slow, disappointing son became. I'm going to go find out, and heaven, as it keeps promising me, rewards the diligent.